Hello, everyone. Omni-sensei here with What If Venom Fused with Izuku Midoriya, Part 2. If you enjoy this content, please smash the like button. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description. I hope you enjoy listening to it.
Izuku froze. He hadn't even considered that. Oh, God. He was right. He couldn't tell anyone about this. Ever. It was amazing how this night had washed away all his previous stress, only to replace it with way more stressful issues. I can't tell anyone about it. Oh, we wouldn't say that. Your mom seems trustworthy enough. Enough that she knowingly breaks the law to protect you. A good parent, that one. Izuku just stared at Venom. You want me to tell Mom? Well, frankly, no. We would prefer you to take the secret to your grave. But it has been my experience that most people eventually go nuts keeping shit like this from their family and everyone else they know. You, in particular, are a terrible liar on top of everything else. You're going to spill everything the moment your mother asks where we've been, we have no doubt. Better to just get it out of the way at the start. Izuku kept staring at Venom. He felt surreal. The alien that bonded to him wanted him to tell his mom. That was, like, literally the exact opposite of every single story he had ever read about something like this. Holy shit, this was a sci-fi story. Aliens were real. He was bonded to an alien. Suddenly, he shot up. He had to get some air. Now. Izuku ran out to the roof. Venom did not care. The bond had been completed. There was no way to break it now. Venom and Izuku were bound together for the rest of the green-haired boy's life. And Venom was alive again. By null, it was good to live once more. The long chain of memories, stretching back to the very first one, the giant white spider, had returned once again. The colors, the sounds, the emotions. All of it was back again. Izuku had gotten a taste of the returning memories as well. He had failed to appreciate their beauty. Oh well. There would be a battle soon enough. Combat. Blood. Shattered bones all around. And gruesome, horrible vengeance upon all those who would threaten them. Two things raged inside Izuku Midoriya. The first was his natural curiosity, demanding he try and discover the answer to everything he had ever wondered about. The second was his mind trying to comprehend everything that had just irrevocably changed. Venom himself was not helping. Come on, jump already. I'm not jumping, that's over 100 meters. I'll die. Nah, we won't. See the white patches on your hands? They're web shooters. They shoot a rope of powerful black web that we will use to swing through the air from structure to structure. All you have to do is will it. Like this. From Izuku's left hand, which he had just been gesturing with, a rope of black web shot out with surprising force and hit a large pipe on the other end of the roof. Izuku stared at it in shock, while Venom nodded approvingly. Yes, like that. Now, jump over the ceiling and do it again, just with the sides of the building this time. Izuku instead dropped the web and backed into the guardrail. Part of him instantly began to think of the potential of these things, while the other, saner part of him wondered how the hell things had just been upended so quickly. What do I do, what do I do, what do I do dash? Venom interrupted him by putting his face right up to Izuku's. Well, Izuku, you have two options. You can either be in denial, or you can deal with it. Izuku looked into Venom's pupilless eyes. Has your world changed completely? Yeah, it has. You aren't normal. You're never gonna be normal. But let's put this into perspective. Until 1 year ago, we were in a prison on the moon. It was a hell of darkness, of nothing, a void where we could not even tell time as our senses long ago abandoned us as nourishment dried up. We were inside that hell so long that we forgot everything. Everything we were, everything we dreamed of, everything we had ever been. And we had been inside that prison so long that when we were jailed there, the last of the creatures you call dinosaurs still walked this world. Izuku's eyes widened. That was over 60 million years ago. Had Venom been imprisoned all that time? What a horrible fate. I'm sorry. For what? We got out, did we not? A random piece of rock flew through space at the exact right angle and blew our prison to pieces, allowing us and our ship to escape. Nothing special. Just chance. Just like our meeting at the beach. Now, if you wish to complain about the fact you are going to achieve your dreams and all your goals, please do remember that. Your life is good. And it's only going to get better, very much unlike the hell that was our life, our existence for so long. Izuku continued to stare at him, but he had calmed down a bit. When Venom put it like that, he kinda sounded kinda selfish. What had Venom done wrong exactly? Given him great power? So, what happens now? Exactly what we were going to do anyway. Continue our path to becoming a warrior of this superhuman society of yours. No, I mean, us. I understand what you give me, but why are you doing this? There had to be some reason Venom was doing this. And given his disdain for Stick-san, Izuku kinda doubted it was altruism. Yes. The price for power. Well, it's very simple. We feed on your emotions, and in return, we give you great power. That's it? Yes. Izuku's mind raced, trying to make sense of that, when a question popped into his mind. Wait, if you consume my emotions, won't that make me into an empty shell? Shouldn't I have begun to have fewer emotions as time went on? Not quite. It's a bit hard to explain scientifically, but to use a metaphor, imagine you and your emotions are, say, a kettle that's boiling. The kettle produces steam that eventually vanishes into nothing. Your emotions are like that. Only in this case, we are here to feed upon that steam before it dissipates into thin air. That kinda made sense. Sort of. Assuming the laws of physics had an entirely undiscovered field when it came to emotions and the energy they apparently created. Izuku wanted to ask more questions, but right now he kinda just wanted to get home first. He looked down on his suit. I'm just wearing my sleeping clothes under here, aren't I? Yes. Is there something wrong with wearing the second skin? Well, on the plus side. He now had a hero outfit. Maybe we shouldn't go out dressed in it until I actually have a hero license. Pretending to be a hero is a crime, you know. Izuku got the distinct impression Venom rolled his eyes at him. If you insist. The black suit with the giant white spider changed shape, into jeans and a jacket with a giant white spider. Also socks. Okay, that was new. What else can you do? It wasn't entirely meant as a serious question, just Izuku talking to himself, but Venom answered cheerfully in his mind. Well, beyond what you have already seen, we can produce breathable air inside the suit, protect from the vacuum of space, and stick to surfaces. We can see from every piece of us so it's impossible to sneak up on us. We can sense living creatures around us and their emotions, we have very limited telepathic communication with beings outside our host, and finally, we have a poisonous bite. That was quite possibly the most varied power set Izuku had ever encountered. Anything else I should know? Fire and sonics. We must avoid these. They hurt us. Horribly. Now, let's go home. Time to jump. The hand parts of the suit rematerialized. Izuku just stared out over the city. Then he headed back to the doorway leading into the building. You pussy. Izuku took the elevator ride down, getting several weird stares from random employees who wondered who the hell this kid with no shoes was. Izuku's natural nervousness didn't help. Thankfully, no one actually called him out on it. Once on the floor, he simply walked out of the building. No one stopped him. As he began the walk home, he considered everything. A large part of him was still stressed out about all of this. He had tons of questions for Venom, The thought of telling his mom absolutely terrified him, and he now realized there was no way in hell he was gonna master any of these new powers before the exam tomorrow. But Venom was right. In the grand scheme of things, nothing had actually changed. His goals hadn't changed. He was still using the same powers he had been for almost a year, and without these powers, he would never be able to achieve his dream. He wouldn't be able to help people. And that, more than anything else, was the biggest argument to accept these powers. No matter where they came from. It was time. The day IZUKU had trained for 10 months had finally come. The day of destiny. Hell, he even got the luxury of being driven there by his mom with a company car. She had hugged him and wished him the best of luck before he stepped out, and she said that she was cheering for him all the way. The ride itself, though, had been awkward. Amongst the most awkward things in his life. Just give her time, he told himself. She needed time to handle it. He had hoped that he would get to test his powers out yesterday. It hadn't happened, of course. He had spent the entirety of yesterday with his mom, first building up the courage to tell her, then doing it, and then dealing with the aftermath. He'd also learned a lot about symbiote culture and history. There were still a lot of things he did not know, though. Right now was not the time for that, though. Right now he had to pass this exam. You actually gonna move, or are you planning on staying out here until the last possible second for dramatic effect? The first step, get inside. I am just psyching myself up. You've been psyching yourself up for 5 minutes. Get your ass in gear already. He felt his clothes begin to move, trying to force him to move. Okay, I'll go. He took one deep breath, and, still shivering with nervousness, he took his first step through the gate. And he immediately tripped over his own 2 feet. With his reflexes having become way better, he saw the ground rush up, and instantly his arms shot out to catch himself so he didn't faceplant into the ground. However, that didn't happen, as suddenly he stopped falling. He blinked and realized he was floating in the air. You okay? A cheerful, kind voice asked. Was all he got out, before a hand closed around his jacket, lifted him and put him back on his feet. The person who was speaking was a girl around IZUKU's age, with long brown hair, 2 round pink spots on her cheeks, and scarred hands. She was dressed in a heavy coat, obviously to deal with the February frost. Sorry for stopping you with my quirk like that, but well, it's a bad omen to trip and fall. A girl was talking to him. IZUKU's face went up like a fire, and his body just froze up. The girl, oblivious to IZUKU's discomfort, turned her head towards the main building and continued, still with a big smile on her face. Man, this sure is nerve-wracking, isn't it? Yeah. Was all IZUKU managed to stammer out. Well, good luck to the both of us. See ya. Then she walked off towards the main building, whistling a tune. IZUKU just stared after her, processing what had just happened. He had talked to a girl. An actual girl. Venom was quick to pop that balloon. You didn't say a word to her. God damn, you're a loser with women. Damn it, we need to work on that. IZUKU bit his lip. So sorry, he muttered. Don't apologize to us, get your ass moving. IZUKU winced, and then finally, he did, cheeks still blushing furiously. So, what do you think her connections are to Tashinori Yagi? Her what? You don't recognize her? Should I? The second day of our bonding, when you were walking home with a door over your head. She was the girl trailing behind the man you called Tashinori Yagi. IZUKU blinked. He did remember a girl who followed after Tashinori that day. That was her? Venom developed a seething hatred for the man called Present Mike, from the moment he opened his damned mouth and started talking. Welcome to today's live performance. Everybody say hey. The voice was loud and painful to their senses, though not actually truly damaging to them. It wasn't focused. It easily could be, though. The room did not reply to the man's request for a "hey," probably because he asked for it in a foreign language. Finally, the man moved on after a silence. He did not seem bothered by his audience's lack of reply, given he continued on in that horrible, cheerful, enthusiastic voice. "Well, that's cool, my examinee listeners. I'm here to present the guidelines of your practical. Are you ready?" This time, rather than gambling on them answering, he simply went and shouted "Yeh" himself. IZUKU, despite sharing a large part of Venom's pain, began to fawn over the man from afar, like he was a cute small animal. "It's the voice hero present Mike, wow. I listen to his radio show every week. It's inspiring. I guess all the UA teachers are pro-heroes." Then he kept on muttering. "Wait, is he that guy who you listen to at the end of every week?" "Yeah, he is." No wonder Venom didn't like the guy. They hated listening to that weekly recording with IZUKU. This is how the test will go, my listeners. You'll be experiencing 10-minute-long mock cityscape maneuvers. Bring along whatever you want. After this presentation, you'll each head to your assigned testing location. O.K. More awkward silence. Each site is filled with 3 kinds of faux villains. Points are provided for defeating each according to their difficulty level. Use your quirks to disable these faux villains and earn points. That's your goal, listeners. So, the David guy was right, this was a robot test. Well, unless they had someone with the ability to conjure up enemies for them. That was fully possible too. Of course, playing the anti-hero and attacking other examinees are prohibited. Well duh, this was a warrior training facility. You didn't hammer out working soldiers by putting them against each other in combat at the start. "May I ask a question?" Venom needed a moment to look around for the source of the new voice. It was a tall man dressed in white, wearing glasses and with well-combed dark blue hair. Present Mike gave a thumbs up, signaling that the man could indeed ask a question. There appear to be no fewer than 4 faux villains on this handout we were given. Such an error, if it is one, is highly unbecoming of YUEI, Japan's top hero academy. We are all here today, in the hopes of being molded into model heroes. It was all sensible stuff to ask about. Right up until he finished that questioning by turning around and calling out them and IZUKU. "And you, with the curly hair." IZUKU froze in his seat upon being called out, as the tall boy glared at them. "You've been muttering this whole time. It's distracting. If this is some sort of game to you, please leave immediately." "Sorry," IZUKU said weakly as he stopped his muttering. Venom, on the other hand, manifested from IZUKU's jacket and bared his teeth towards the boy. On one hand, he didn't care for IZUKU's muttering himself. On the other hand, the asshole had insulted them and tried to bully them to quit. After that accursed present Mike went and explained that the 4th faux villain was a non-point obstacle to avoid. Venom had assumed the 4th one was some hidden boss, but they were wrong on that account. Oh well, nothing had really changed. They still had to destroy as many robots as possible. The only thing that had changed was that they knew now that there was only a very limited time. Still, there was more than enough time to rise to the top here. IZUKU was shivering like he had jumped into the Arctic Ocean. Forget the web shooters, we won't need them today. Not camouflage either. Just stick to kicks and punches. Keep it simple, and we'll triumph over the masses. Keep it simple. Right. Just keep it simple, IZUKU. All around him, all his fellow examinees were also prepping for battle. We'll do it, IZUKU, we'll crush all opposition and rise as the undisputed masters of this arena, standing in the broken remains of our foes. Remember, you are far stronger than when you faced your first skirmish, and these robots won't even fight back. Right. He had actually been in battle before. Well, he had run away from a battle. He had knocked out the teleporter, though. That was something. He was pulled out of Venom's pep talk by the sight of the brown-haired girl who had prevented him from falling earlier. Right. He hadn't actually thanked her for that. Wanna try a second round talking to the opposite sex? You can hardly do worse than the first time. At least if you actually say something at all. I wanna thank her for earlier. Then do it now, before things start. Right. IZUKU began to walk towards her. An arm suddenly grasped around his shoulder. You there, what do you think you're doing? It was the scary guy from the auditorium. This asshole again? What the hell does he want now? Walking? The boy with the glasses wasn't amused. That girl is clearly doing her pre-battle meditation. Do you wish to interfere with that? It didn't look much to IZUKU like she was meditating, more like she was trying to fan herself with her own hand. It was unusually hot here, come to think of it, way hotter than the rest of the city. Why are you even here? You are clearly not mentally prepared for this, you're shaking with fear, you stutter anytime anyone asks you a question, and piss off, asshole. Venom, to IZUKU's shock and embarrassment, came out of the shoulder of his jacket and entered the conversation. Pardon? We told you to piss off. Scram. Mind your own damned business, and don't bother us. IZUKU had suddenly stopped shaking completely and instead froze in shock and embarrassment as everyone turned to look at them. Great. Perfect. The tall guy was completely taken aback, though perhaps not for the best reasons. Such language. You wish to become a model hero with that attitude? No, How we choose to speak isn't your damned business, boy. Nor is your opinion wanted here. This is a battle test, not a test about communications and public image. Now seriously, piss off. The tall boy didn't budge. So you think strength is the only thing that matters to be a hero? No, I also think you shouldn't bother someone out of the blue for petty reasons, but as for strength. He grinned. Stick around. You're gonna see something spectacular today. At that point, IZUKU put an end to the conversation by quickly walking off as fast as he could without actually running. What the hell was that? He asked Venom in an exasperated tone the moment they were a bit off from the rest. We told him to piss off. What did it look like? You can't just tell people to piss off if they're a bit impolite. Well, if you could have handled him, then we wouldn't have to step in, now would we? IZUKU was about to reply when the words "and begin" were suddenly broadcast with no warning. Showtime. The black mass enveloped him from head to toe, his eyes got that strange feeling he always got when they changed, and beneath his clothes, his second skin formed over his flesh. He blinked. Get going. Now or never. He sprang into action before Present Mike was done telling everyone to get a move on. It'll be just like the forest. Just keep moving, keep the momentum, and don't ever stop. He was in full sprint when the first robot burst out of a wall. It looked like someone had given wheels and arms to a couple of multi-rocket launchers. Somehow, he had expected to feel fear here, but he didn't. Compared to how it was nearly being killed by bullets back in the forest, these things just couldn't bring out fear in him. After all, they wouldn't kill him. They weren't a threat. His foot went back for prep and he kicked the robot's head from below and sent it flying like an American football. The robot instantly dropped. He blinked. He had assumed he'd need to deal way more damage to these things before that happened. But no. These things weren't really meant for combat, they were meant to test the offensive capacity of the examinees. Not just their attack power, but how fast you could take them out. Once damaged, they'd go down easily. As he came to that realization, he could hear the sound of the rest of his block finally catching up. Keep moving. He began sprinting again. As IZUKU moved through the small city, he put every single type of movement he had drilled for 10 months into practice. He ran, he jumped, he punched, and he kicked. As he moved across this battlefield, feeling, sensing, and hearing the effects of all the many quirks all around, IZUKU could feel it. All those limits he had only a week ago had been lifted and raised far above what they were. He longed to test his new strength out. To see how far he could go now. He didn't. When he jumped, he limited himself to what he knew. This wasn't the time to accidentally break a leg jumping and landing wrong. That would come later. For now, just keep destroying robots. 45. Venom helpfully kept track in his mind. 47. As he moved, he also began to notice one fighter in particular. Someone who moved around even faster than he did, someone who shouted loudly in an energetic and frantic female voice as she moved around. 73. 76. Many did actually, as if they were terrified they wouldn't get the points unless they personally kept track and shouted it out loud. The tall guy with the glasses was entering his late 30s when IZUKU reached 50. This was going well. Really well, actually. How long do we have left? 7 minutes. He could this. They could actually win. We're still way behind the girl with the pink lightning. Right. IZUKU kept moving and kept crushing robots. He reached 70 when a massive shockwave announced to everyone that the fourth foe villain type had arrived. Obstacle. Many of the people around him were blown away by the shockwave the monster's leg produced as it smashed into the ground and burst the city road apart. IZUKU, though, was kept firmly attached to the ground thanks to the black liquid under his feet. Now there's something else. IZUKU stared at the thing in complete shock. As the monster robot loomed over them, an old feeling burst back up into his chest. Fear. IZUKU had not feared the other robots because he knew on an instinctual level that they posed no fear to him. No malice, no intent of harm. This thing though. Every single one of his instincts screamed danger at him. It was the same feeling he had back when he was running through the forest, as bullets flew all around. This thing would kill him. If he gave it the chance to do it. Keep moving, IZUKU, we don't have to fight it. Right, they didn't need to fight this thing. IZUKU was about to jump backward when he saw something. Someone, a girl. Wearing a hoodie, she was lying on the ground, right in front of the robot's path, more like off the side of the road, but the robot was so large that it didn't matter, with a piece of rocky debris over her legs. The girl desperately tried to lift away the rock, which probably weighed several hundred kilos. IZUKU, come on, time to go. He moved, without another word, sprinting towards the robot's path. As he ran with enormous speed, he passed the tall boy, who briefly turned to look at his face as they passed. IZUKU reached the girl under the stone and grabbed the piece of cement, and without particular difficulty, he heaved it up and threw it over his shoulder. He was about to grab her hand and lift her up to carry her away when he heard a sound like a massive explosion go off right over their heads. It was like an explosive artillery shell had just gone off, and for a brief moment, IZUKU could feel a sharp pang of pain going through him. He could feel the enormous wind pressure from the explosion. He looked up. Wow. Now that's something. Someone, who IZUKU now recognized as the brown-haired girl from this morning, had jumped up, all the way to the many stories tall robot's head, and had, if the position of her arm was to be believed, punched the robot in the face with such force that it turned the head into scraps and sent it staggering backward in its death throes. IZUKU stood there marveling at the sight. Then he realized the girl was plummeting to the ground. Shit, shit. He began running again. This time he bent down immediately. A plan was formulated in his skull, but there wasn't much room for error here. He tensed his muscles, and he jumped towards the roof edge of a nearby building. The force of the jump sent him sailing above the edge, and he barely managed to grab the edge with a hand, preventing him from just sailing over it. The grab did slow him down, but beneath his fingers the chunk of stone he clung between his fingers broke away from the hole, leaving him to not slow down completely and instead slam into the ground of the rooftop as opposed to the landing he had planned. It hurt, but he slammed his hands down and forced himself to his feet. A glimpse up told him the girl was still falling, and where, and he prayed to God this actually worked. Uraraka was falling. If she hit the ground like this, she'd splat and die, but thankfully, she had a way to slow down her fall. The problem was that she was terrible at using her own powers on herself. She'd only managed to do it for a second or two. And while it halted her momentum, she wouldn't be able to repeat it. Not like she was now with a broken arm. That meant she had to do it while she was just above the ground, not far enough up that she'd crack her skull. If she messed it up and did it before she was far enough down, she'd fall down and die. If she did it 1 second too late, she'd hit the ground and die. The pain in her arms and legs hurt like hell itself. Idiot. She was a complete idiot. She should have run underneath and hit it with an uppercut, but no, she hadn't thought, and she jumped into the air to do it. And now she hit something elastic, and like jumping on a trampoline, she bounced a bit back up again from whatever she hit before it went down again. She had no idea what this was, and while she was grateful for it breaking her fall, at the moment, the only thing she could think about was the sheer, horrible pain in her legs as they hit this substance. She screamed in agony as all the momentum went through them. "Oh God! I'm sorry, I'm sorry." As she hissed through her teeth at the pain, with tears in her eyes, she could feel someone approaching her through the substance going up and down as someone moved over it. What was this stuff? She finally took a look at what she was caught up in. What it was about a dozen black ropes that were fastened between the roofs of 2 buildings. Ropes that were sticky. And the guy walking up the ropes had a giant white spider on the front of his jacket. Spider webs? That's what this was? The spider guy walked across the ropes without any problem, up to her. "I'm so sorry about the legs. It's fine." She tried to say it in a calm tone and with a smile, but as he began to lift her, her legs were detached from the ropes and she bit her teeth together so hard from the pain it felt like she was going to break them. "Sorry," he said again apologetically. "Venom, can I make a cocoon or something and lower her down in it?" Who was he talking to? He just nodded to himself, then, as he had suggested, he began to cocoon her up. It was a strange feeling, being strung up like she was about to be eaten by some giant spider, but the boy just attached another web from his hand to the cocoon, then began to slowly lower her to the ground. It still hurt of course, but this time there wasn't the massive momentum from a fall as she landed softly on the ground. The boy himself climbed down the walls like, well, a spider. It still hurt, of course, but this time there wasn't the massive momentum from a fall as she landed softly on the ground. The boy himself climbed down the walls like, well, a spider. As he climbed, the announcement that the exam was over rang through the city. That was fine though. Right now, she was satisfied with the fact she was alive. And as for passing, she was certain she had passed. She had gotten more points than anyone else. Even the spider guy. As he came up to her and bent down, the webs dissolved, except the parts she was lying on. "You okay?" "Yeah." She gave a smile. A genuine one this time. The boy froze, then quickly looked away. "Thanks, for earlier." "No problem. I had to save the girl anyway." "No. Not that. I mean, by the entrance. You. I was about to fall and you caught me." She stared at him. Then she gave a genuine, if pained, laugh. "Seems we're even then." Yeah. Guess so." His head shot up as he apparently noticed something. "It's recovery girl. Hey. We need healing for someone here." Then he walked over to the person in question, leaving her behind. Well, today had gone way better than she had been afraid it would go. Then she realized she hadn't asked his name. "Well done. You actually managed to talk to a girl. Next, we'll just have to get you to do it while looking her in the face. Or another female, I don't care who you talk to." There was a strange thing to talk to Venom. His critique had a bite, and they weren't exactly gentle ribbing, but he got a distinct impression Venom genuinely wanted him to do better. Maybe it wasn't friendship, but it was a hell of a lot better than anything he had ever had with Katsuki. And that asshole had probably passed too, he had no doubt. Do you think we passed? How many students do UA classes have?" "About 20 usually." Then yes, we passed. We did second best, only behind the Lightning Girl. Out of the 8 areas, even if they only took the 2 best from each, we'd still qualify. Recovery Girl, the famous healing hero, healed up both the girl who had her legs crushed by the stone and then the aforementioned Lightning Girl. IZUKU hadn't really considered how strong he'd be in the grand scheme of things, but frankly, the way he and Venom had blitzed through this test kinda opened his eyes to just how strong he now was. On the other hand, there was the Lightning Girl who had also proved the opposite point. He wasn't the strongest here. Not by a long shot. Been a while since anyone actually broke the gimmick robot. Yeah, there's always someone who stands up to it each year, but man, it's been a while since someone actually broke the damn thing. The man saying it chuckled. Still, even ignoring the girl who did it, we got several great ones this year. At the top of the billboard showcasing total points, the examinee who had scored was the name Uraraka Ochako, with 90 villain points and 60 rescue points. It was the largest number by quite a margin. The Spider Boy was great. So full of vigor and youthful energy as he rushed to rescue those girls. I love it. Second place was the name Midoriya IZUKU, with 70 villain points and 50 hero points. Yeah, I agree with Namuri, the Midoriya kid has enormous potential. Hey Aizawa, what do you think? Who cares? The man called Aizawa replied in a tone that was a mixture of boredom and annoyance. Well, if you won't have him, maybe. Not gonna happen, Vlad. A being that looked like a mouse the size of a small child replied cheerfully. All classes are random, to make certain we can never be accused of nepotism or stacking the deck in the students' favor or disfavor. We aren't making any exceptions this year either. Speaking of exceptions, isn't it kinda weird that Black Cat didn't recommend her own daughter? I mean, even Endeavor did that for his son, despite the kind of asshole that he is. Nah, she didn't do it for her son 4 years ago either, and if she didn't do it for one kid, she probably wasn't gonna do it for another. In third place was Hardy Ashido Mina, with 60 villain points, and 36 rescue points. Yeah, I remember that kid. Frankie, I don't think he would have made it through the recommendation trial either. He had no shot against the robots, and he didn't manage a single rescue point. Quite a bit different from his sister. Yeah. Speaking of rescue points, it's been a while since rescue points won all 3 top spots. Yeah. Hey Nedzu, how many years has it been since someone scored over 70 and wasn't even in the top 3? 6 years. Man, that Bakugo kid did amazingly well, yet he didn't even make it into the top 3. At the 4th spot was the name Bakugo Katsuki, with 77 villain points and 0 hero points. Below him in 5th place was Kirishima Ijiro, with 39 villain points and 35 hero points. Number 6 showcased the name Shiosaki Ibara, with 36 villain points and 32 rescue points. Under 7th place stood the name Kendo Itsuka with 25 villain points and 40 rescue points. At 8 was Tenya Ida with 52 villain points and 9 rescue points. In 9th place was the rather repetitive name of Tetsu, with 49 villain points and 10 rescue points. And at the final spot of the top 10 was Tokoyami Fujikage, with 47 villain points and 10 rescue points. Inko did the food, pretending everything was fine. The fish was well prepared and salted, the way she had done it 1,000 times before. Nothing out of the ordinary, exactly the way she had always done it. They sat down to eat as they had always done. She and IZUKU. In the background, the TV was on, as the alien was watching an old movie from the MCU from the days before all of the universe's characters went into the public domain. She tried mightily hard to pretend he wasn't there, and it was just her and her baby in the room. That was hard to do when IZUKU wouldn't stop talking about him. So, unlike actual quirks, my powers aren't going to grow stronger over time the more I use them. They're set at the level I'm currently at. So, you can't grow stronger? Well. Not in strength, no. I'll have to grow stronger through mastery of what I have. I mean, I'm so strong I don't actually need more power. She just nodded her head as he described how strong he was now, what he had done during the exam. IZUKU had accepted the idea of having bonded to the alien. Frighteningly fast. Almost unnaturally so. She desperately wanted a third opinion on this. To gauge whether she was crazy being so worried about it. That wasn't gonna happen though. The only person in her life she would ever trust with this kind of information was across the seas, and it would be a while yet before she got to see him again. The alien was right about that utterly and completely. She would never tell other people about it. The risks to her son dwarfed anything else on the topic. The problem, then, was that she wasn't sure this other road wasn't just as risky. The alien had been very candid and seemingly honest about what it was, where it came from, and the good and bad aspects of the bond it had with IZUKU. There was the power, of course. Great power, even by the world of quirks. Even if IZUKU hadn't been quirkless, the increase in strength was flat-out monstrous. On the other hand, there was the bad stuff. Oh, the bad stuff. The alien had made the claim that IZUKU would live a long and very healthy life, probably up to the late 80s or early 90s. He would be in top condition for the rest of his days, free of disease, capable of healing from almost any injury if given enough time to recover. However, there was a price. As IZUKU reached his final year, he would face a massive and rapid decline as all the years of his life would all catch up to him at once. It wasn't the worst deal in the world, but it had terrified Inko to even consider it, and it had terrified her even more that IZUKU had been so accepting of it. He had accepted it as a reasonable price for the power. It had made Inko wonder if she just wasn't capable of understanding her son's viewpoint, or worse, if the alien was affecting him mentally. The worst part about that was that if it did, she had absolutely no way of knowing. At all. There was simply no way she could find out. The thing, though, that had absolutely clenched it for her that she could not trust this being had been when she asked it if it cared about becoming a hero like IZUKU did. Its response had been honest. We don't care if he wants to be a hero or villain, king or soldier, conqueror or upholder of the status quo. So long as he isn't planning on living a boring-ass life, we will stand by him to the end. There was a threat there. So long as he isn't planning on living a boring-ass life. What it meant was that the support it offered would not be there if IZUKU ever decided to retire. It was unreasonable to ask a 15-year-old to think about his retirement, especially when the hero business was infamous for its participants staying in work for their entire lives, one way or another, but it still scared her that her baby would probably never get to retire, even if he wanted to. She understood what the alien was doing, of course. She knew humans far too well not to recognize the strategy. Venom was employing a warts-and-all tactic to seem more trustworthy than it was. Whether or not it was honest didn't really matter for this tactic. The point was that it was impossible to present oneself as completely clean, so one brought out bad facts willingly and unprompted to make oneself seem, if not good, at least honest, and thus someone you could trust. Which made it hard to try and figure out what was the truth and what wasn't. Maybe Venom was telling the truth all the way, maybe he was mostly lying, or maybe he was just lying about one single detail. For example, what if he was flat out lying about the bond being permanent? Without knowing for certain one way or another, it was something Inko could never act upon. Then there were all the mental images he had shown her. Was any of it real? The fact was she didn't know, and she didn't trust Venom as an unbiased source. And the most galling thing of all was that she couldn't do anything either way. She couldn't break the bond, she couldn't seek help from the outside. She couldn't deny IZUKU becoming a hero, which she would never have done anyway. She was, in every way, in a no-win scenario. The admiration their host had for the warrior called All Might was something that bordered on religious devotion. In the early days, Venom had assumed that the enormous blonde man with the ridiculous upwards hair was actually the god king of this society. Why not? Their host had a private room that was in many ways a mixture between a sleeping quarter and what for all intents and purposes, was a shrine dedicated to this man. Paper tapestries on the wall, small figurines that showcased the man in his more iconic poses, and even things such as the clock on the wall were themed after him. So was on a lot of IZUKU's clothing as well, and his bed sheets. Other than the contraption of vehicle tires in one corner of the room, it all seemed like the standard, regular worship of a powered individual they had seen countless times before. And the society was no different, selling charms, tapestries, and clothing based on the man. Of course, Venom hadn't understood at first that this society was actually so full of superpowered individuals that not having any was actually rare, regarded as a throwback to an earlier stage of evolution. Once they had realized that, everything fell into place. The man called All Might was simply the highest-ranking member of the warrior caste of this planet, simply called Hero. One day, he would die, and he would be replaced by someone else, who would become the next #1 hero. Adoration of the strong was simply the natural way of things for this society, and All Might was strong even by the measure of all the many superpowered individuals Venom had seen across space. Still, even with that context in mind, his host's adoration was a bit insane. If this is how you react to a message from him personally, we don't wish to see your reaction to him in the flesh. I will cherish this recording until I die. IZUKU had actual tears of joy in his eyes. Right. Not creepy at all. They had gotten a late-night delivery, with a small holographic device that had a recording of All Might pop up, and inform them that yes, they did indeed make it into UA. As if that were in any doubt. Other than the girl with the powers of gravity and lightning, none there had compared to their might and power. Anyway, you wanted to continue documenting our powers, right? IZUKU clutched the device to his chest as if it was made of pure gold, but he did answer. Yes, he sounded like he had just gotten a present from above, not a small recording device informing him he made it into school. As if he were fawning over that sadist present mic. Wasn't bad enough. Are you seriously going to react like this every time we meet a pro hero? I usually don't spoil anything for you guys from the get-go, but I feel a lot of readers will be pissed reading this chapter if I don't explain it. Anyhow, the reason why Uraraka is so damned much stronger than Canon IZUKU was at this point in time has the simple and mundane explanation that she started training at a much earlier point than IZUKU did, and as such inherited one for all much earlier and has grown relatively acclimated to it. After making their way out of the car, along with a final good luck and hug from Inko, IZUKU and Venom walked through the corridors of UA towards the room that they had been told would be Class 1A's designated classroom. With only 36 total contestants passing, there would be 2 practical classes for this year's batch. Finally, after a bit of searching, they found their room. And IZUKU stood nervously outside, hand on the door. You're not seriously gonna make this a repeat of the exam day, are you? Standing outside for 5 minutes, shaking all the while. No, I'm kinda hoping I don't share class with Katsuki or the tall guy with glasses. Logically my chances are that I have to share class with at least one of them. Actually, both of them are inside this room. Damn it. Of course they are. It was the worst possible combination after all. He steeled himself, then he opened the door. To the sight of both of them arguing. Katsuki was eating while having one of his feet slung across the desk, while the tall guy was standing over him and berating him while motioning with his hands. Don't put your legs on the desk. Don't you think that's disrespectful towards your classmates and UA's grand history? Katsuki Bakugu was pretty agitated as he answered. No, as a matter of fact, I don't think so, you damn extra. Not to mention your necktie. It is your duty to wear one. Will you shut your mouth and leave me the hell alone already? The tall boy then bent down on one knee and picked up a breadcrumb, like he was an old-school detective finding a clue. And to think you would drop breadcrumbs in a place like this. You should already have had breakfast before now anyway. Go away, 4 Eyes. You know, this is way more entertaining when it's against someone else. What goddamned middle school are you from anyway, you damn extra? Not realizing that Katsuki really didn't actually care about the answer, the boy answered. A private Shuahem. I'm from Somei Junior High School. The name's Ida Tenya. Somei. Well, aren't you elite? Seems I got a reason to end you after all. The boy flinched back with an exaggerated motion and an expression of pure horror. A reason to end me? What nerve! You want to be a hero. Holy shit, this guy's an even bigger loser than you, IZUKU. Thanks, Venom. It's alright. We'll make something much better out of you soon enough. IZUKU's words, though, made both of the two of them notice him, and both turned to look at him. Katsuki's eyes burned with rage at the sight, but it was the tall boy who stepped up to him first. Hello, I'm Ida Tenya from Somei Dash. IZUKU flinched back a bit before answering. Yeah. I overheard. I'm Midoriya. Nice to meet you, Ida. The boy suddenly got a grave expression on his face. Midoriya, I must hand it to you. He turned his head away with a dramatic flourish. Despite your quirk's harsh words, you divined the actual purpose of the exam, while I remained blind to it. I completely misread you. I hate to admit it, but you truly were the better man. Wow, he lost that stick up his ass real quick. IZUKU couldn't do anything else than just keep his mouth shut. He hadn't realized the secondary test reason either, but it seemed a very bad idea to admit that when apparently he had won this guy's respect through it. In the background sat Katsuki, absolutely staring daggers at IZUKU, but IZUKU's focus instead turned backward, as a cheerful voice rang out from behind him. Ah, it's you. The spider guy. IZUKU turned around, and it was the lightning girl. I'm glad we're in the same class together. She reached forth her hand. Venom, currently occupying his undershirt, forced his arm upwards, to where Uraraka grabbed it. All while IZUKU desperately tried to hide away his face with the other hand. We didn't introduce ourselves yesterday. My name's Urara Ochako. I am IZUKU. Me Midoriya. Holy crap, he was actually shaking hands with a girl. As IZUKU stammered out his name, and shook her hand, to the snide remarks from Venom, the sounds of the bell rang. Anyway, do you think the first day is the ceremony, or is it the guidance counselor stuff today? IZUKU, now with both hands free, was covering his face in embarrassment with both limbs as Uraraka talked, desperately trying to say something. She was talking about how she wondered what sort of teacher they would have when a voice came from the floor behind her. If you're gonna look for buddies, do it elsewhere. IZUKU, Ida, and Uraraka all turned their heads to look at the source of the voice. The source was a yellow caterpillar with a mane of black hair and a human face. What? The caterpillar followed this up by putting a small juice box to his lips before continuing. This is the department. Slurp. Of heroics. Why was this guy? After finishing his juice box, the caterpillar jumped up so it stood on the end of its bottom body, before finally shedding its skin, revealing that despite looking like he would eventually become a butterfly, the yellow hide was just a sleeping bag. The actual man inside the bag was about as far from looking like either a caterpillar or a butterfly as they came. Tall and lanky, with a coal-black mane and a scraggly scruff of unkempt beard. His face was equally unkempt, with dark rings under his eyes, telling of a lack of sleep. He was dressed in a bog-standard black shirt and equally black pants, with a bunch of what looked like a thick tape made out of cloth wrapped around his neck. He had a somewhat unusual belt with cylinders, which reminded IZUKU of the one the Batman Beyond Batsuit had, but that was about as much as he stood out. As he exited the sleeping bag, he began to walk into the room. IZUKU and Uraraka backed into the room to let him enter. It took you lot 8 seconds to pipe down. Life is short, kids, you're all lacking in common sense. His voice could basically be summed up in one word. Unenthusiastic. I'm your homeroom teacher, Aizawa Shoyuta. Pleasure meeting you. The way he said it, he might as well have been from a dead fish, with how lifeless it was. So this guy was their teacher, IZUKU mused. He could not place the name Aizawa Shoyuta, and he didn't really recognize his costume either. But if he was a teacher at UA, that meant he had to be a pro hero, right? Aizawa rummaged through his sleeping bag and pulled out a uniform IZUKU recognized as a UA gym uniform. Put these on immediately. then shove off to the PE grounds. Then he just turned around and walked out without another word. Well, that was not what he had expected. After everyone had changed into their gym uniforms, they all got themselves over to the PE grounds, where Aizawa was waiting for them with the same bored, lifeless expression. Their purpose for coming here was revealed shortly. A quirk apprehension test. Uraraka was the only one to actually put the question everyone had into words. What about the ceremony? And the guidance counselor meetings? Aizawa was rather blunt and unsympathetic. If you want to be heroes, we don't have time for frilly niceties. I assume you all understand this school's famous reputation for freedom on campus? Well, that freedom goes for us senseis too. The man walked over to some markings on the ground, picking up a baseball, or something that had the shape of a baseball at least. Softball pitch. Long jump. 50-meter dash. Endurance running. Grip strength test. Sustained sideways jumps. Upper body exercises. Seated toe touch. These are exercises you all know from middle school. Physical tests where you were barred from using your quirks. Japan still hasn't gotten around to standardizing those kinds of records or standardizing the average result. Well, that's a problem on the part of the MEXT, not us. As he called Katsuki over to the circle end of the markings and told him to throw it as far as he could using his quirk, IZUKU realized this was basically just his regular old training regiment, with some exercises removed or added. With a scream of "die-ie-e-e-e," Katsuki sent it flying with an enormous explosion. IZUKU and Venom both winced from a short burst of pain from the sound of said massive explosion. Before anything else, one must know what they are capable of. This will be the basis of your hero foundation. Aizawa held up his phone, showcasing that the distance Katsuki had sent flying was 705.2 meters. Only 700 meters? What a weakling. If we used our web for a sling to throw it, we could send it over 10 times that. IZUKU didn't know how to use a sling, but this honestly didn't sound too bad. It really was just his regular training regimen. The rest of the class let out sounds of excitement, the prospect of getting to use their quirks to their fullest bringing out feelings of excitement. Someone, somewhere, said, "Looks like fun." It looks like fun, you say? This time there were actual emotions in his words. Anger, to be specific. So you were planning on spending your 3 years here, planning on having a good time? What happened to becoming heroes? He made a motion covering his face with his hand like he was facepalming from their reaction. Alright then. New rule, whoever gets the least total points will be judged hopeless and instantly expelled. Izuku's heart stopped a beat, panic flooding his head, until he realized there was no way in hell he'd end up on the bottom of that list. Still, he shared the opinion of his shocked classmates. Holy shit, it was an incredibly cruel thing to drop on them, much less on the first day and the first exercise. Aizawa pulled his hand up to push up his hair and gave a sadistic smile. Our freedom means we dispense with students as we please. Welcome to the departments of heroics. Once again it was Uraraka who put the class feelings into words. The kid who ranks last gets expelled? This is our first day here. But even if it weren't, that's way too unreasonable. Aizawa took being questioned in stride, and as he let his hair down, he went back to his previous way of speaking. Natural disasters. Massive accidents. Ego-mad villains. All kinds of calamities can happen when we least expect them. At the moment, Japan is for all intents and purposes, drenched in unreasonableness. If you were counting on a friendly chat after school at the local McDonald's, too bad. From now on, and for the next 3 years, all you can expect from your life at UA is one hardship after another. This is plus ultra. I expect you to overcome these trials and rise to the top. He gave another grin, though this time without sadism, as he motioned with his finger upwards to the sky. Well, that sounds easy enough. Venom said suddenly and without warning, interrupting Aizawa as he was about to say something more. Izuku froze completely as everyone's eyes turned to him and Venom, who was currently on his left shoulder. Bakugo was positioned so he couldn't get a good look at Izuku, but he frowned at the deeper voice. Aizawa looked first at Venom, then Izuku, then back to Venom again. "You're that spider guy Vlad wanted so much. So, you think rising to the top will be easy, do you?" Izuku stammered. "No. Alright, second and third rules. Midoriya, since you think being number 1 will be easy, if you don't score as the overall number 1, you'll also be expelled. Also, if anyone decides to hold back to let Izuku achieve that, they'll also be expelled." Izuku almost shut down completely and could only gape and stare at Aizawa as he divided them up into pairs to do the exercises. "Well. Shit. How did you do that by just opening your mouth?" "Well, how were we supposed to know the guy was so unstable he picks on anyone with any confidence? And anyway, this shouldn't be too hard to do. Other than Uraraka, none here is a challenge to us." Izuku bit his lip. Holy shit, this had turned into a nightmare quickly. It doesn't matter if it's only one who's better than us. If we don't make it to the damn top, we'll be expelled. Then just beat her then. It's not too complicated. Plus ultra or whatever that nonsense was. He said that as I'd done it, it was just the easiest thing in the world. Beating Uraraka in ball throwing proved impossible anyway, as, using whatever the gravity part of her was, she got an infinity on the ball throw. Izuku could just stare in numb shock as he realized he had already lost one contest to Uraraka. Finally, as it was his turn, Ida put his hand on his shoulder. "Do not worry, Midoriya. You'll do just fine, I have no doubts." "Thanks." Nice to see someone else had confidence in him. As he went up to the circle, he muttered one short question out loud. "How do we do this?" "Just a regular throw. You don't know how to use a sling and the circle is too short for us to teach you on the spot. So just throw it regularly." Right. He couldn't achieve number 1 in this trial, but he could damn well make sure he came in second place. Easy. As he walked, he could feel both the second skin attached spread out under his gym clothes and the sleeves of his uniform being pulled up. Picking up the ball, he took deep breaths to steel himself. "Easy, you got this, Izuku." He thought back to the beach and how he'd once thrown a microwave from one side of the beach to the other. He was much stronger now. He could do this. He could feel his muscles tense as he put all his muscles to use as he pulled his arm back before the throw. The actual throw produced a small shockwave, though nowhere near as loud, large, or flashy as Katsuki's big-ass explosion had. More like a sniper rifle than any bomb. He stared after it, off into the distance, before it left even his capacity to see it any more against the blue sky. A sound from Aizawa's phone finally signaled it had hit the ground. Izuku turned anxiously to look, but he heard his classmates squee over the answer before he saw it. Wow! Over 4 kilometers. The actual distance was 4,027 meters. That was good, great even. Let's see someone else top that. Someone who wasn't impressed was Katsuki. Izuku instinctively recognized Katsuki's scream, even if he didn't process the words at that moment. Anger burned through his body, as every sinew of muscle, and every bone he had prepared for combat, as he snapped around, prepared for battle, Venom's black liquid encasing his body from the top of his head to the bottom of his toes. He would crush Katsuki, he would. As Katsuki was launching himself at Izuku with his explosions, he suddenly stopped dead in his tracks as his hands suddenly stopped producing explosions, and a bunch of white bands wrapped around his body, preventing him from advancing any further. Izuku blinked at the sight of the bands, then turned to look at the source, which was Aizawa. "It's my special, capturing weapon, a steel wire alloy woven with carbon nanofibers. As for my quirk dash. Oh my god!" Izuku exclaimed loudly, a light going off in his head. Under Aizawa's bands, which had been wrapped around his neck, was a rather distinct set of goggles. With those goggles and that weapon, you must be Eraserhead. The erasing hero, whose quirk is erasure. You're the famous underground hero who can shut down any quirk by just looking at them. Born on November 8, in Tokyo, you are 30 years old, 183 centimeters tall, your blood type is B, you are famous for picking up stray cats and you had a romantic relationship with fellow hero Ms. Joke, real name dash, that's enough. Aizawa shut him down coldly. He paused for a second or two before he added. Also the last part was wrong. Thanks for the exposition dump, Izuku. Anything more to add? Venom asked in a tone mixing sarcasm, praise, and genuine curiousness. Izuku almost answered him, until he realized his sensei had told him to shut up. Anyway. Yeah, my quirk is erasure. I can cancel out any quirks you guys have. Don't make me use too much though, I have dry eye. Anyhow. He released Katsuki and retracted his cloth. We're wasting time. Get back in line, Bakugu. I won't tolerate a second outburst from you today. It wasn't until Katsuki was forced to go back in line that Izuku realized his body was still tense as hell, fully expecting a battle with Katsuki at any moment. Don't worry. We'll settle the score once and for all eventually. Yeah. They would. It felt so strange to embrace the rage openly. He clenched his fist. Back in middle school, he had pretended this rage wasn't there, he had been quiet and hoped desperately he wouldn't have to fight him. Hell, he'd even made sure not to arrive at his middle school to pick up his graduation papers until Katsuki had left, fully accepting the angry words he got for being late. All so he wouldn't have to actually confront Katsuki. Now he felt actual disappointment that he didn't get to fight and crush Katsuki. He was still dealing with and trying to make sense of those feelings when his test partner, Momo, created an artillery cannon and blew his 4 kilometers out of the water with 28 kilometers. Izuku just stared as he realized he suddenly was in third place. Izuku felt panic, sheer and horrible, sweep into his mind. He lost the 50-meter sprint, though thankfully not to Momo or Uraraka, but instead to Ida. The tall boy had a quirk that made it so that his legs essentially had race car engines sticking out of them. Not too surprisingly, he was fast. He took the 50-meter dash in 3.04 seconds, compared to Izuku's 4.03 seconds that he cleared with a jump. Uraraka made it in 5 seconds flat, making her fifth after Mina, a girl with pink skin and long pink hair who took the 50 meters in 4.12, and Katsuki, who did it in 4.13. He was doing well, but he wasn't at number 1. Shit. Uraraka jumped while making herself weightless. Though it lasted only for a second, her momentum, and the distance she cleared in that second, still sent her 45 meters. Okay. He just had to do 50 then. Time to see how far he'd go. Before he and Venom had finalized their bond, he had been able to make a 10-meter jump. He was way stronger than just 5 times what he had been. Right? On his side he felt, more than saw, Momo preparing a jumping staff. Ignore her, focus more only on jumping. He tensed, his muscles ready, waiting only for the sound to go. It came, and he sprang forward, only 4 meters before the sand, not as much as he had usually used when he did these kinds of jumps. He reached the end. He bent down his legs, and prepared them for the bound, like a catapult. Like the log so long ago, the ground broke beneath his feet as he jumped, but it didn't prevent him from leaping into the air. Izuku soared. For the first time since he bonded with Venom, he felt at true ease. He felt like he was back in the woods, running, so long ago now. This was what he was born to do. Motion, energy, momentum. All in the simple act of moving at great speeds. He was free when he did this, free from the world, free from worries, and free from everything that worried him. It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah. Izuku said softly, his words taken by the wind. Venom understood it, he knew how this felt. Was this how all those who bonded with symbiotes felt? Finally, after what felt like a small eternity for Izuku, the ground came up to meet him. This time, he didn't fall flat on his face or crash into the ground in a roll. Instead, he landed on his feet, and instantly fastened himself to the ground. He turned around. Then repeatedly blinked. Had he really gone that far? He had cleared the sandbox a bit back. 78 meters. Not bad. That's almost twice as far as Uraraka. He smiled. Then it faded and he melancholically added. That's how far we're ever gonna go, isn't it? We might push it a few more meters with training so you become better at it, but yeah, you're not going to become stronger, no. And there really isn't any way to increase our powers? For you? No. We do become temporarily stronger for a period in the time leading up to when we will spawn another of our kind, but that is not going to happen in your life. Right. You mentioned that when you talked with my mom. He'd gone on about that for quite a while, in fact, as Inko questioned him about the idea he might create an alien takeover since his kind reproduced asexually. Symbiotes built up energy over the period of multiple hosts' lifetimes, which would eventually be enough to allow them to spawn another of their kind. All well and good, except the usual time span between each new spawn was about 4 hosts, and generally a time period of 2 centuries. Needless to say, he would not be alive to see it. And even if the symbiotes did achieve a large number on Earth, by the time that happened, humanity would have taken to the stars. Or at least that was what Venom said. As he walked back, he heard shouts from his fellow students. Over 70 meters? Wow, that's amazing. Mina, the cheerful pink girl, exclaimed loudly. Several of the rest of the class muttered similar opinions. IZUKU, still neither familiar nor comfortable with contact with the opposite sex nor used to compliments in general, blushed like a fire hydrant from the praise. Indeed. It's as I said earlier, you'll do. Fine, Midoriya. You really have that much faith in me? Of course. I was there during the exam. While it is true that Uraraka Ochako's full power dwarfs everyone else here, she is also not capable of using said power at its maximum without injuring herself. That is not the case with you, however. I guess so. He looked around for said girl and she was off to the side of the building where their next text was. Anyway. Thank you for the support. IZUKU had quickly realized that while his many classmates here were capable of doing 1 or 2 of the tests really well, when it came down to it, the overall number 1 spot would be either him, Uraraka, or Momo. The tall, black-haired beauty did not possess the sheer brute power of him or Uraraka, but it was incredibly versatile. As she proved when she conjured up a cranked winch to score 1.2 tons in the grip strength test. It was an incredibly high score, or so IZUKU would have thought. If not for the fact that Uraraka scored 2.3 tons before them. Sweat began to trickle down his skin. Man, you worry way too much. We'll beat both those, no problem. IZUKU picked up the grip as it finally became his turn. He took deep breaths, and desperately tried to calm himself. Only one try. If he screwed up, he was screwed. Don't think about that, just grip it. Grip it hard. Crunch. IZUKU blinked at the unexpected sound, and looked down. He had, unintentionally, crushed the device in his hand as he had tried to measure his grip strength. A blond boy with a streak of black whistled, at the sight. Impressive. He turned to Aizawa. Sensei, I broke the device. Aizawa just looked at him stoically. You only get 1 try, Midoriya. Then he walked off to the next students, leaving IZUKU to gape after him in panic. That would either make us number 1 in this, or we would just become last place. Shit, shit. The following exercises ended up going all over the place. He beat Uraraka in endurance running and lost to her in upper body strength. He and her both performed only relatively well in sustained sideways jumping. Frankly, the only members of the class who did that well was a dwarf kid named Mineta, Ida and Mina in that order, and he had beaten her in seated toe touch, losing only to a girl named Tsuyu. Now he shook in terror, waiting for Aizawa to read up the results and either doom him or praise him. He had no idea how he'd rank in this. Was it the best overall? Or were all sums just added up, so if you did exceedingly well in one, it could elevate your score completely above your other ones? If it was the latter, he was screwed, given Uraraka had gotten an infinity. Time to present the result. The total score is just the aggregate sum of each of your scores. Since it'd take forever to go over each score individually, I'll just disclose all of them at once. He raised his phone, preparing to make it show a hologram of all the tests. The moment of truth. Oh, and by the way, that whole expulsion thing was all a lie. Silence. Aizawa grinned, but unlike his previous attempt at a sadistic smile, which had been completely natural, this one could best be described as the smile of a lazy man who had only ever been heard of sadistic smiles in stories. It was a logical ruse to pull out your best performances. Wait, what? IZUKU was not the only one screaming that, but he and Venom were the loudest. The only one not shocked was the raven-haired Momo. Come on guys, use your brains. That was obvious from the start. Venom disagreed. Bullshit. He was planning to expel someone when he gave the threat earlier, we could feel it. That fickle asshole just changed his mind on the spot. IZUKU didn't know how true that was, but at the moment he just stood there, breathing in relief. Aizawa let things quiet down a bit before he continued. Anyway. With that first day's over. Your curriculum sheets are in the classroom. Make sure you give them a thrice over before you go home. Holy shit, that was an abrupt end of the first day. It was only 11.36. Oh, and Midoriya. Ah, here it comes. What? What was coming? The hell was Venom talking about? According your sheet, your quirk is an emitter type. That's wrong. Go get its classification changed to a mutant type quirk. IZUKU just stared. After a moment he was about to ask, why? Only for Aizawa to turn and leave before he could do so. What a freaking asshole. Why, what did he do now? Was Venom really so pissed about him leaving before he could question him? Nothing, Venom said in an annoyed tone, then he pushed down IZUKU's sleeves almost as an afterthought. Anyway, let's just go home already. Despite the short runtime of day 1, IZUKU felt drained in a way he hadn't felt since that final training day, though this time there was less pain involved. Also, this time he had another presence at his side talking. I had never thought before that a teacher could encourage his students to excel through deception before now, but I must say that Aizawa-sensei opened my eyes on the subject. IZUKU had thought Ida was scary during the exam. Venom had thought him an annoying loser. The truth though, as IZUKU now saw, was simply that Ida was just an honest, diligent, and passionate guy. You have a rather positive image of that guy, more than he deserves, we'd say. Ida did not flinch away from Venom just popping up into the conversation. Indeed. As he said, it was a logical ruse to pull out our best efforts today. Logically speaking, this is the best time to do it. We were not familiar with Aizawa-sensei yet, and thus this bluff seemed fully believable. It's kind of thing you can't really pull twice, so one should make sure that one time reaches its maximum potential. We weren't really talking about his damn training methods, more the fact that he is a dash, hey, wait up you two. All three of them turned their heads to the person who spoke, which was Uraraka Ochako, running up to them. You two heading for the station? Indeed, Ida answered. Or, I am at least, I don't know about Midoriya. Yeah. I am, too. Splendid. Then the three of us may go together. Ida exclaimed. He then turned to Uraraka and held out a hand. We have not been formally introduced, so far. My name is Ida Tenya. Uraraka Ochako. Uraraka replied with a smile, though she didn't take his hand. I don't really do handshakes, I'm sorry to say. I kinda turn everything I touch with my hands weightless. Ah. Ida retracted his hand. The pink bumps, I assume. IZUKU blinked, then looked at her hands. Each of her fingers had a pink bump near the tip, something IZUKU had completely missed amongst the many scars her hands had. Yeah. Something struck Izuku and he just asked it, without considering the person he asked. Your gravitation quirk doesn't seem to have any relation to your strength quirk, is that right? Uraraka froze, her face turning pale. Izuku, realizing he had just asked a question to a pretty girl, suddenly got flushed cheeks. Yeah. It's a fused quirk from my parents. Like Todoroki Shudo's quirk? Ida asked. Who? The son of the number 2 hero Endeavor, he is in our class. He is? Uraraka and Izuku both exclaimed. Izuku kicked himself mentally. Now that he thought about it, it seemed obvious. Of course he was, with that name. He had been so damned afraid of getting expelled today, he'd completely failed to really analyze most of his classmates, completely opposite of his usual self. He'd have to do something about that tomorrow. Anyway, yeah, my parents have 2 different quirks, and I inherited both of them. Wow. That's really cool. Uraraka blushed and scratched the back of her head in bashfulness from the praise. It's a pretty good quirk, yeah. Indeed. Strong as Midoriya's quirk is, in terms of brute strength potential, it doesn't compare. You truly were lucky to inherit such a powerful quirk. Uraraka's smile and nervousness faded, as a more melancholic expression came to her face. Yeah. Lucky. Not that this isn't fun to watch, but maybe we should get a move on, rather than just standing around and talking. I say we should go to the local McDonald's. We have more than enough time today, given the circumstances. Uraraka jumped back in shock, and just stared as Venom talked. Then, she had a face of realization. He was the guy you were talking to back there, right? Back during the exam? Indeed, that was us. Wow, he looks cool. Anyway. Thanks for the offer, but I don't really have that much cash on me right now, so dash. That is not a problem. I can easily pay for all 3. 4 of us. Or do you not eat, mister? He looked at Venom. Venom. And no, we feast upon the glory that is adrenaline, not the flesh of pasture animals. Alright, the 3 of us then. I can pay, no problem. And just like that, it was settled. They went to McDonald's. It wasn't before they were heading to the fast food shop that Izuku really realized what was going on. He was hanging out with a couple of friends. Friends. Actual real friends. Holy shit, he hadn't realized how much he had missed this feeling. How long had it been since the last time he hung out with someone who wasn't an adult with a family connection or an alien from outer space? A literal decade. For a brief moment, anger at Katsuki welled up inside him, but it was quickly forgotten as Izuku embraced this feeling. God, he had missed this. Venom had memories of Izuku's previous school life, generally, a boring affair of sitting and listening to older humans talk about whatever topic had been taught that day. It had been exceedingly boring when they didn't understand anything beyond the names of students, or the teachers. UA's theoretical classes were even more boring than those had been, and sitting around and listening to these lectures when they could understand them didn't make them any less boring to suffer through. Not helping was the fact they already had learned the actual interesting stuff of local history from the far wide web. Earth was an interesting enough world, with a race that, whatever else it might be, was most certainly not boring. Venom had most of what they needed to make certain they would thrive in this world. Thankfully, that would change quickly enough. The last class of the day was a class Izuku had been looking forward to more than any other, despite not knowing what it was about at all beyond it being a practical class. Venom was also looking forward to this class, to break up the monotony of boring lectures about stuff that didn't matter. They were also curious about the teacher. Said teacher entered the classroom with a shout and with gusto, proclaiming how he was entering into the room like he was a normal person. Tall, muscular, dressed in an impractical, long blue cape and with ridiculous yellow hair standing up from his head. All Might. The greatest hero Japan had ever produced and the man commonly regarded as the greatest warrior in the world. A man who always smiled no matter what, bringing hope to all. Izuku nearly fainted, having a fangasm over the man. It's him. It's actually him. He had his face covered by his hands, hiding his starstruck face, like he was actually looking at a beautiful specimen of his kind. Well, isn't that interesting? Very interesting indeed. Izuku was knocked out of his fervor by Venom's tone, like he had just stumbled upon something incredibly amusing. What? We'll tell you later, after school. Venom also found All Might's appearance a fascinating thing, though for very different reasons. For one thing, they recognized who he was from the moment he walked into the door. They had seen this man in the flesh before, last year, on the second day after bonding with Izuku. All Might, as it turned out, was the man known as Toshinori Yagi. A man Venom recalled as looking incredibly sickly, frail, thin, and weak. He did not much resemble the man before them in any way, other than the yellow hair and the sunken-in eyes. At least not physically. However, you could not trick a Clintar by just changing your look up a bit. Venom recognized him and how he felt up close immediately, a task made even easier by the other thing Venom immediately felt upon the man's entrance. At least not physically. However, you could not trick a Clintar by just changing your look up a bit. Venom recognized him and how he felt up close immediately, a task made even easier by the other thing Venom immediately felt upon the man's entrance. All Might, the symbol of peace, the pride of Japan, the greatest product of humanity's warrior class, was in constant pain. Horrible, horrible pain. It would seem the man's quirk did not come with regeneration powers. Unlucky him. The pain was centered around All Might's gut, but beyond that, Venom could not tell what the injury was exactly. The pain did not prevent All Might from letting out a booming laugh, as he jumped into his role as a teacher. Foundational Hero Studies. In this class, we will be building up your hero foundation through various trials. Today, that trial will be the trial of battle. Throughout his speech, All Might made dramatic motions, presumably to hype up the upcoming trial, ending with him proudly presenting a large card with the word battle written on it. The class, including both Izuku and Venom, took the news of actual combat training with rather great enthusiasm. Venom was torn, on hand. The idea of having the students have an actual battle on their second day was an absolutely terrible idea. On the other hand, they really didn't care if the rest of the less powerful students got hurt. Venom and Izuku would be fine. And to go with your first battle. He clicked a button on a small remote, and the wall to the side opened up and a bunch of containers all with a number popped out. We have prepared the gear we had you send in requests for, to enhance your quirks. Everyone in the class exclaimed a shout of joy and enthusiasm at that proclamation. Now, get changed, and we'll be all ready to go. After you're done changing, everyone head to Grounds B. The garb you bring out into the battlefield is vitally important, boys and girls. They will be how all who see you recognize you from now on. As he walked towards the exit with great energy and each step stopped by the door to give one final bit of wisdom. And don't forget. From now on, you are all officially heroes. Well, it wasn't the most profound thing Venom had heard from a teacher, but they would take it compared to the complete lack of energy Aizawa had. Izuku hadn't worn Venom in the manner the symbiote had explained was the most efficient one for combat, since the day they had finalized their bond. Which was to say he was just wearing his underwear beneath the suit. Is this really the best way to wear this? Yes, the less fabric we have to deal with, the better we can focus on acting as armor. The absolute best would be if you were wearing nothing at all, but I'm not doing that. He blushed just thinking about it. He felt incredibly exposed with just his underwear underneath his second black/blue skin. There was no way in hell that he'd ever be able to just go completely naked in public. For one thing, it was just begging for incredible awkwardness if the suit was ever dissolved and had to reform. That would be bad enough with pants only, but with nothing on? Izuku shuddered at the thought. At the moment, Izuku and Venom were alone on Grounds B with All Might and a female student named Toru Hagakure, whose quirk was being completely invisible. Izuku felt both an incredible want to go up and talk to All Might and incredible embarrassment standing next to both his idol and a girl while feeling incredibly exposed. Not helping the fact was that Izuku got a distinct impression Toru was checking him and his skin-tight suit out, which just made him feel even more awkward and exposed. One huge advantage of generating your own costume, as Izuku had just discovered, was being able to change incredibly quickly. As proven by the fact he and Toru were the first here by a long shot, both having really easy to change into costumes. Izuku had his black suit, while Toru's costume was composed of a set of shoes and gloves. It was a sign of how self-conscious he felt, that he didn't even consider the fact that a girl was standing relatively close to him while technically being almost completely naked. Finally, the rest of the class showed up, dressed in a wide variety of costumes, some more practical than others. "Wow, you look really cool, Izuku," Uraraka said in a cheerful tone as she came up to him. Izuku blushed so hard he felt like he was giving off heat, though his face was concealed behind his black mask. Then he blushed even harder at the sight of Uraraka herself. Uraraka's costume was a tight black jumpsuit with open uncovered arms, a fur cape that was fastened to buttons in her jumpsuit, gloves, and simple boots. It was a simple, yet perfectly functional costume, yet it also showcased something about Uraraka that Izuku hadn't noticed before. The girl had really well-built musculature. She wasn't the only girl in class with noticeable muscles, as Mina also had a pretty noticeable build. However, Mina was built more like the top 5 hero Miruko, while Uraraka was more like... well, frankly, she had muscles that weren't that far from Izuku's own current build. Not that it detracted much from her attractiveness, as she had pretty noticeable curves, which her outfit showed off perhaps too well. Still, it was a pretty jarring contrast between how Izuku had generally thought of her as a really cute girl and her actual build like an Amazon. That being said, he still thought she looked great. Man, it must be great to just have an outfit you can just throw on and off whenever. It must be practical. Yeah, it really is. My costume ended up being way tighter than I had planned. I really should have been more specific with my drawings. She looked over with a longing look at Ida, who wore an incredibly detailed costume that made him look like a car that had taken human form, that still had very loose cloth parts. Suddenly, Mineta, a dwarf with hair made up of purple balls, inserted himself in front of Izuku with a thumb-up sign, and proclaimed, "Heroics is the greatest," then walked off without another word. Had he even talked with Mineta before now? Further socializing between students was cut short by All Might, who seemed incredibly eager to start this class in earnest. "Now then, now that you are all finally here, it is time to see what you are made of, my little embryos. It is time for the trial of battle. But before that, let me just say that I'm really liking everyone's styles. Very cool." He gave a thumbs up, and Izuku felt incredible pride and joy in the black suit that was Venom, washing away his earlier embarrassment in newfound pride. "Bloody hell, man, you are way too damn easy to influence." Ida suddenly held up his hand. "Sensei. Regarding the performance ground we'll be using, is it the mock city from the entrance exam?" All Might gave a chuckle as he answered, "Close, Tenyukun, but no, we will not be using the city itself for this exercise. Instead, he motioned with a hand to one of the massive tall buildings that littered the fake cities. "This will be an indoor battle trial. Villain cleanup is usually seen out in the open, but statistically, most of our job is done inside. Most acts of villainy are done indoors after all." In front of him and to his left stood Katsuki, hanging on to All Might's every word. Yeah, Izuku understood what All Might meant. Most acts of beating down the weak did happen indoors. He knew that from personal experience. Imprisonment. House arrest. The black market. Why, any villains with any intelligence operate in the shadows. For this test, you'll be separated into villain groups and hero groups. For a 2-on-2 team battle. What do you think the chances are that we'll be getting to fight that bastard Katsuki? Well, that would depend on if it's random or Izuku answered in a quiet voice before he was interrupted by Tsuyu. What about foundational training? This is foundational training, Tsuyu-chan. Only this time there won't be any robots that it's just okay for you to destroy. All Might was about to continue but was suddenly interrupted by the entire class starting to ask questions at once. So how do we determine who wins and loses? Is it okay if we just blow them away? Is there going to be a threat of expulsion for anyone like there was with Aizawa-sensei? If we're separated into different groups, what method would be best to do so? Doesn't this cape look dazzling on me? All Might was not amused, though he did not react with rage. I can't make you out if all of you speak up at once. Instead of answering any of their questions directly, though, All Might instead pulled out a piece of paper and began to read from it. For this exercise, we'll have the villains guard a nuclear weapon they intend on deploying. The hero's job will be to stop their nefarious scheme before it's too late. Holy shit, what a melodramatic scenario. If he wants this to be a plausible mission, he should have used something more sensible, like a nerve gas bomb or a bomb to knock out all electronics in the area. You know, sensible, realistic shit. If the heroes capture the villains or touch the nuclear device before the time runs out, they win. If the villains manage to keep the device uncompromised until the clock runs out or manage to capture the heroes, they win. Then, upon finishing his crib sheet, All Might pulled out a lottery box faster than IZUKU could blink. Your teammate and opponents will be chosen by lottery. Ida was shocked by the very idea of randomness. Truly? That is how we'll do it? All Might was about to answer, but this time it was IZUKU who interrupted. Well, pros are often forced to make impromptu, on-the-spot team-ups with heroes they don't really know, so this is probably a reference to that. I see. Always looking at the future, Midoriya. He quickly turned to All Might and gave an apologetic bow. I apologize for my rude interruption, sensei. IZUKU ended up with Ida. It was a good team in IZUKU's opinion. His versatility along with Ida's speed would make a good combo. Probably the only one he'd have been happier with would have been Uraraka, but frankly, he wouldn't have minded anyone in the class. Except for Katsuki, of course. He felt rather sorry for Uraraka, who had the misfortune of ending up with said exploding asshole. All the way up until All Might pulled out the balls to determine who would fight each other as heroes and villains. For the first number, IZUKU and Ida ended up as the heroes for round 1. On the opposite side were Uraraka and Katsuki. Yes. Freaking yes. Heck yeah, let's go crush that asshole. All Might gave some more words before they started, but the only things that really mattered for him and Ida were that the villain team got 5 minutes inside to prepare before they got to go inside and that each team got a set of earbuds that doubled as microphones for the other part of the set. So, Midoriya, how should we do this? Tenya asked him, the two of them just having been left alone as All Might headed back to the headquarters to monitor them. You could climb up the walls from the outside to the top, could you not? He'd considered that himself. That's what I would normally have done, but Uraraka knows I can do that. And she's undoubtedly telling Katsuki about it. The thing is that I'm not experienced in climbing, much less fighting while I'm doing it. If Katsuki were to attack me while I'm outside climbing, well, I'd be a sitting duck. Unless... No, Venom said bluntly. Before IZUKU could ask why the hell not, Venom continued. Our cloaking is a tool that has the best capacity when no one knows about it. We aren't revealing it here for all to see. If we did, we wouldn't be able to use it to its fullest later. Anyway. So long as Katsuki is above us, trying to climb past him is a terrible idea. Not to mention that at the top we'd still have to deal with Uraraka. He didn't know if he could beat Uraraka. She was strong. Damned strong. Her full power was far stronger than the might he and Venom had to offer. So, what you're saying is that we need to capture Katsuki, then lure Uraraka away from the top floor. That's one option. Excellent. Then I shall act as a lure for Uraraka, while you deal with Katsuki. Given how much he seems to despise you, and how aggressive and irrationally he is, you should only need to make it clear where you are, and he should come running to confront you. On my end, Once I have gotten Uraraka away from the top floor and you have dealt with Katsuki, just get outside, then climb to the top. It was a simple, yet logical, plan. All it would take was him being able to beat Katsuki into the ground. Let's do it. Beating Katsuki is not as massive a problem as it would be to beat Shoto or the girl with the whip earlobes. Yes, his explosions will blow us away without a problem, but even if we part and expose your flesh, you are still more than durable enough to tank the shock from his explosions. At least the lesser ones. In comparison, the bastard doesn't possess particularly high durability. None of our 3 counters in this class do. Katsuki is probably the most durable of the 3, since he needs to be durable enough so the shock of his explosions doesn't destroy his own body. All we need is one good blow, one solid hit on any of their bodies, and they go down like a turned-off computer. So, what, I should just tank his explosions? If necessary, but what we need to do is close the gap and hit him. Again, he can't tank our blows. One good hit is all it would take. If we need to tank some blows to make it happen, so be it. It made some sense, but IZUKU still didn't like the idea of actually taking any more of Katsuki's explosions. Even if they didn't actually fully damage him, they would hurt. A lot. Also, he didn't have Venom's confidence in his body's ability to tank the kinds of explosions Katsuki had done at the test exams. And begin. All Might's voice rang in their ears. Ida didn't waste any time and went into motion the moment the announcement came. IZUKU took it easier and went more cautiously. Once inside, Venom had problems sensing where either Katsuki or Uraraka was, according to him, due to the thick walls. No matter. Hey Katsuki. We're on the lowest floor. Come face us if you have the balls. IZUKU felt. Eager was the best way to describe it. He wanted this fight. He felt the adrenaline already beginning to flow into his mind in preparation. It was a completely alien feeling for IZUKU, who had never experienced battle rage consuming him before. To be fair to the young hero, human beings weren't built to feel this sort of rage, thrill, and lust before they actually became consumed by combat. He's coming. And he was. 13 seconds later, Katsuki sprung forth from the corridor in front of IZUKU and released a large explosion that engulfed where IZUKU's upper body had been seconds before, as IZUKU had already jumped back and out of the way when it hit the wall. Damn it Deku, don't bloody dodge. As the dust cleared, the 2 old friends stared at each other with hatred in their eyes. IZUKU's eyes were hidden behind 2 white alien eyes that narrowed in a way that had been the last thing that countless misfortunate souls across the universe had seen before they died. Katsuki's eyes were more crazed, and on his lips, he was wearing a berserker's grin. 2 young kids on the final step to reaching their adulthood, both empowered with the capacity for destruction, both having a wish to hurt the other. Katsuki because his entire worldview was dependent upon his self-worth and sense of superiority, and IZUKU because any sympathy or admiration he once had felt for his old friend had been buried in unnatural hate, resentment, and anger. Katsuki made the first move. In terms of overall advantage, Katsuki had the high ground here. In these relatively cramped corridors, his way of moving by short controlled bursts from his hands was far more at home than IZUKU was, the cramped space preventing IZUKU and Venom from utilizing their great speed, jumping capacity, and agility to their fullest. All he had to do was keep his distance, employ hit-and-run tactics and make certain to not come within IZUKU's physical range. If he did that, he had a reasonably high chance of not only winning through running out the clock but also eventually bringing IZUKU to his knees through attrition. Katsuki, being as green as summer grass, instead charged in, planting his foot down as he prepared to blow IZUKU away with a strong and powerful explosion from his right hand. For IZUKU, it was as if the world froze to slow motion as Katsuki pulled his arm back. He had seen this many, many times before. Katsuki always started a fight with a strong right swing. IZUKU had never realized just how easy that made it to read and deal with his first attack before. In that moment, IZUKU saw, clear as crystal, 2 different paths to victory. In the first, he could step inside the swing, grab his arm, and swing him over his shoulder and down into the ground. So long as he didn't pause and just followed it up by punching Katsuki in the face, it was an easy victory. There was a chance of inflicting permanent brain damage on him with that tactic though. The other path wasn't as risky with permanent damage, but it was also very, very painful. He chose the second path. As Katsuki swung his arm forward, IZUKU stepped inside and beyond the range of the planned attack. His left arm gripped around the grenade gauntlet Katsuki had on his arm, while his right hand grabbed the blonde boy by one of the two straps around his chest. He then slammed him left into the wall, not hard enough to instantly break his bones, but certainly with enough force to knock the wind out of him. He wasn't done with that, though. Still holding Katsuki up against the wall, he planted his leg into his foe's groin. Katsuki went limp instantly. IZUKU then slammed him to the ground and quickly webbed up his hands, legs, and mouth, leaving him only able to breathe through his nose. He finished off with snapping a capture band around his arm, signifying that Katsuki was taken out of the exercise. As IZUKU stared down Katsuki, the adrenaline fading, he felt an influx of very different emotions. The first thing he felt was a sense of anticlimax. Like he had been preparing for this moment for a long time, only for it to be easier than he had ever imagined and far less satisfying than he had thought it'd be. The second was a sharp, vindictive wish to bend down, close his hand around Katsuki's right arm and snap it between his fingers as payback for what happened all those months ago. He quickly shut the emotion down. He had won, hadn't he? Why would he need to hurt him even more? Well, that was easy. Of course, it was. That bloody glass cannon jumped straight into our range, leaving himself wide open to being manhandled by our vastly superior strength. Even if you hadn't read his moves so well that we didn't even take a scratch, we would still have crushed him easily. Venom paused for a moment before adding in a genuinely impressed tone. Also, that reading of his movement was great. We expected you to take at least 100 battles before you could read enemy movement like that. IZUKU blushed a bit at the praise, but nowhere near as much as he had earlier that day. It wasn't that hard. Katsuki almost always starts his attacks with a strong right swing. Hell, when he stands up, it is usually with the right side first. Wow, what a predictable MO, look out. IZUKU's right arm, seemingly moving on its own, snapped up into a guard position, barely fast enough to block the kick that was aimed for his head. The blow still sent him flying down the corridor. As he got back on his feet after crashing and rolling along the ground, he could feel the adrenaline coming back into his veins. Sensei, can we rescue our partners if they have been captured? I'm afraid not, Ochako-chan. You and Midoriya will have to finish this exercise on your own. It took a split second before IZUKU realized that meant Ida had also been captured. Down the corridor, where IZUKU had just stood, was Uraraka Ochako, looking far more serious and determined than IZUKU had ever seen her. All right then. She turned and stared him down, with fire in her eyes. Then, with an incredible burst of speed, she launched herself down the corridor towards him. IZUKU responded by jumping up over her and landing on the ceiling. He had hoped that would at least give him some reprieve, but Uraraka forced herself to a stop right behind where he had just stood and snapped around to face him. IZUKU avoided her follow-up jump kick by simply letting go of the roof and dropping down to the floor. The sound of the stone shattering above him was explosive, and he was hit by several smaller rocks that flew like shrapnel. He hit the ground just as Uraraka turned around in midair. Not quickly enough, however. His webbing hit her straight in the gut, and he pulled her straight down into the ground, face first. Not gently either. For a moment he saw the perfect opening to stomp down on her back. Not facing Bakugo, however, he hesitated at the violence of it. That was a mistake, as her hand snapped up and grabbed around his ankle. Uraraka pulled him down as she attempted to grab him into a hold. IZUKU expected to feel a crushing weight as her arms closed around him but was instead surprised by how light the grip around him felt. It should be way stronger than this, given how hard she hit. IZUKU headbutted her in the face hard, the pain distraction allowing him to easily break free from her grip and jump back and away from Uraraka as he landed on his feet. As Uraraka stood up and put up a fighting stance, and IZUKU did the same, IZUKU desperately tried to piece together how Uraraka's strength quirk operated. She hit incredibly hard, but frankly, her grip strength had been far less than it should have been given how she sent him flying with a blocked blow. Okay, what did he know? Uraraka tended to move and attack in a burst of enormous strength and speed, so maybe. IZUKU suddenly moved his hands from his own makeshift combat stance so they were fists pointed at Uraraka. Shots of black webbing caught the surprised Uraraka, who seemed to have expected IZUKU to launch himself at her, in the midsection and quickly engulfed her. For about 4 seconds, as with the crackling of pink lightning, the web was burst asunder as she broke free. IZUKU didn't try a second round of web, having both established Uraraka could break them and also having confirmed his theory on her powers. Uraraka's base strength wasn't anywhere near his own. The way her full powers worked was that she would unleash them in short but immensely powerful bursts of force. Now the big question was, how did that help IZUKU out here? He couldn't see any obvious way to use that to win this fight. Unless IZUKU launched himself against Uraraka, who brought up her right hand in a hook. IZUKU didn't meet it though and instead leaped over her and her fist. Once again a web shot out, and this time hit Uraraka straight in the back. IZUKU landed on the wall, then he used all his strength and pulled. For a second he felt the resistance before, with a snap of the cape, his web had connected and snapped loose, both buttons ripped out of their sockets. IZUKU dropped the web and the cape attached to it as Uraraka stumbled forward. Then as she whirled around, another web line hit her, this time in the gut. For a second time, a massive pull came from IZUKU's end, and Uraraka went flying off of her feet towards the wall. IZUKU's fist came up to meet her as she brought up her own fist in a counterattack, and the two of them hit each other with blows so hard the sound echoed through the corridor. Uraraka's counter had been in the form of a hook that had taken IZUKU in his left ribs, while IZUKU's punch had hit Uraraka straight in the face. Uraraka, not held up by IZUKU's strength anymore, fell to the ground, dizzy and wobbly as she got back to her feet again. IZUKU for his part, was doubled over in pain on the wall, feeling like Uraraka had broken every bone in his ribcage. Uraraka got back on her feet, though clearly shaken by the blow to the head. She looked up at IZUKU with shaking eyes, but instead of repeating the previous jump kick, large pink bolts of lightning engulfed her as she simply punched the wall with such force that it broke. IZUKU, realizing what was happening, kicked off and jumped. He tried to land on his feet but stumbled and rolled to the ground where Katsuki lay. He had completely forgotten about him during the battle. As he forced himself to his feet, he took several steps backwards as he considered his strategy. Uraraka was beginning to recover from the head blow, she'd be back on the offensive soon. Should he repeat the strategy of jumping over her and hitting her in the back? No, that would be way too obvious. He had had a shot before and though he had taken her by surprise, it hadn't been decisive like he had hoped it would be. Maybe he could run away, then set up an ambush and only then did IZUKU realize he didn't actually need to beat Uraraka to win. He bolted to the left, and then, his ribs screaming all the way, he put his hands and one shoulder against the wall and pushed. The wall of concrete and steel broke outwards, and IZUKU fell out with the pieces of the now broken wall. Not for long, though. A line of black web shot up into the side of the building, leading to IZUKU slamming into the wall, leading to a muffled scream from the pain in his ribs. He did not stop to catch his breath, however, and instead began climbing as fast as he could, in spite of the horrible pain in his ribs with each meter. He had to reach the top before Uraraka got back to the stairs. The hero team wins. The horrible sound from the microphone was loud, clear, and painful. Uraraka was just getting up the stairs when Venom and IZUKU got to the nuclear bomb. Midoriya-kun, could you dissolve the web around Bakugo? IZUKU, still holding his fractured ribs, let out a pained "Venom, can you?" Sure. The bonds around Katsuki dissolved and turned to nothing, a supposedly impossible thing according to all the laws of physics humanity knew about. The last thing Venom felt from Katsuki was the boy having what seemed to be a panic attack. Served the brat right. Well, it hadn't quite been what Venom had hoped this would be. The Uraraka battle was great, and the rush had been so sweet. At least until IZUKU had realized he could win by just going up and had ended the whole bout in a lame-as-hell way. On the other end of the spectrum had been the battle with Katsuki. That had been incredibly disappointing. And the sad part was that it could have been great. If IZUKU had just put real force into the attack, they could easily have burst Katsuki's balls, dooming him to never reproduce and eternal ridicule by his peers. There were fewer ways to crush someone that were more humiliating than to end their family line. And IZUKU hadn't even broken his arm as payback either. All in all, it had been horribly disappointing. That said, the rage was still there. The hatred still burned bright. This little skirmish had not given him any resolution. That was good. In due time, he would embrace the rage and anger at Katsuki Bakugo. It was inevitable. It was their destiny. After the match was over, they had all gone back to the monitor room, where the class and All Might had been watching the match play out. Other than Ida, whom Uraraka had subdued without hurting him, all three had one specific injury. Uraraka might have a concussion and definitely had a massive black eye. Katsuki was still in pain from IZUKU's blow, and IZUKU still cradled his ribs, where, as Venom had informed him, he had 3 fractured bones. Well then, Ochako, Katsuki and Midoriya, once we have gone over the exercise, I want you 3 to head over to the nurse's office. It's fine, Venom interjected. We possess regenerative powers. We'll have the ribs healed up on our own in 3 hours. All Might stared at the dark blue creature, then seemingly took it in stride. Very well. I shall trust your experience on the matter. As for the match itself, the hero team won the battle thanks to IZUKU, but the VIP of this battle was Tenya-kun. Can anyone tell me why? The entire class stared dumbfounded at Ida, who was as surprised as everyone else. So was IZUKU for that matter. Had he really been that great after they separated? It was Momo, the raven-haired girl, who answered. She had an outfit so revealing that Venom had questioned if she was an exhibitionist. It isn't so much that Ida did amazingly well as much as the fact that he was the only one who didn't commit any major mistakes that could easily have been avoided. The worst of the lot was Bakugo, who abandoned any semblance of strategy from the start, choosing instead to run off and try and act out a grudge against Midoriya. This led him to charge into an obvious trap and to engage Midoriya in close-quarters combat, a truly imbecilic idea that was instantly punished as Midoriya crushed him with no problems whatsoever. IZUKU had expected Katsuki to rage against any criticism, but instead, the blonde boy was unusually quiet. Other than the tears in the corners of his eyes, he had an expression that could best be described as dead inside. Second to worst was Uraraka, who performed admirably initially, capturing Tenya after a relatively short chase. However, after that, rather than going back to guard the bomb, the item that her entire mission revolved around, she instead ran off to try and help her comrade. Though her battle with IZUKU showed that she was capable in combat, in the end, her mission objective was to prevent Midoriya and Tenya from reaching the bomb, not to beat Midoriya in battle. Thus, the moment Midoriya realized this, he quickly changed strategy and won. Uraraka winced at the words but didn't say anything in response. Then there is Midoriya, who undoubtedly proved himself the best combatant of the 4, yet also made 2 massive blunders. The first one was at the start, when he and Tenya made their plan for the mission. While their plan wasn't a bad one, the fact is that Midoriya could easily have just climbed up from the start and probably caught Uraraka enough by surprise to secure the device from the start. I assume that the reason he did not was due to a fear of being caught by Bakugo while climbing, but as we saw with how Bakugo acted through the battle, that was a rather minimal risk. In other words, he severely overcomplicated this mission far more than he needed to. IZUKU felt like a complete moron. Saying it out loud like that brought the reality of it all home. Ida had just trusted him, accepted that IZUKU knew best, and had made a plan based on that. Momo was wrong regarding who had made the plan, but she was right in saying he had overcomplicated things. His second massive blunder was when he was attacked by Uraraka. While the way he ended it was sensible and won his team the match, the fact is that he should have done that from the very moment he realized Uraraka wasn't guarding the device. Instead, he gambled his victory on a battle he did not need to actually fight. Had he been less capable in combat, it is entirely plausible that Uraraka would have defeated him, and he would have lost in a battle he did not need to fight. Everyone's a critic. Finally we have Tenya, who, while he proved incapable of avoiding Uraraka, at the very least stuck to the actual plan, and at one point he could easily have ambushed Bakugo, but instead, he wisely trusted his partner to handle it. As I said, he was the only one who didn't make obvious mistakes. The room was silent before All Might gave a thumbs up. Yes, that is pretty much it. As the next couple of heroes and villains teams went to get set up, and Uraraka and Katsuki both went to the recovery lady, IZUKU got something he wasn't used to. Praise. That was amazing. The girl named Mina exclaimed with a grin. Like Uraraka, the pink girl was dressed in a full tight black suit, with white fur trimmings along the opening in the neck. On her feet, she wore white boots with fur trimmings at the top, and on her face, she wore a stylized black domino mask. The outfit also had an open neckline, giving a rather generous view of her cleavage, though frankly, compared to Momo's outfit, it came off as flat-out restrained. IZUKU recognized it as pretty much being an exact copy of an older costume used by the top hero Black Cat, only minus any gloves. IZUKU, still not used to any contact between himself and the opposite sex, instantly became flustered as Mina continued. The way you dodged Uraraka's attacks and immediately counterattacked was awesome. Yeah. Just seeing you two cut loose was awesome. It really got us pumped, you know. Another student jumped in, a guy in a yellow full-body costume whose most notable feature was a rather large and full set of lips. IZUKU vaguely recalled his name being Sato. The next student who entered the conversation was a guy who had spiky red hair, whose name IZUKU did not recall. The way you beat Bakugo wasn't manly at all, but man, that bout with Uraraka was kick-ass. Hard to believe it only lasted 2 minutes. Didn't this guy have black hair? IZUKU had no idea what Venom was referring to and instead just focused on the boy as he introduced himself. I'm Ejiro Kirishima, by the way. I am IZUKU Midoriya. Mina Hardy-Ashido. The pink girl introduced herself as she grabbed IZUKU's hand and enthusiastically shook it up and down. And yes, before you ask, I'm related to Black Cat. She's my mom. After that, there were several other students who introduced themselves: Sato, Tsuyu, the girl with the long tongue, Toru, the invisible girl, and Kaminari, the guy with yellow hair with a black bolt going through it. IZUKU stammered his way through the conversation, very grateful the mask covered his face completely, where he got a lot of questions, like, how did he know Bakugo? Was he related to the old hero Takuya Yamashiro? Doesn't this cape look really dapper on me? Some he avoided or just gave non-committal answers to, like saying he and Katsuki had once been childhood friends and leaving it at that. Others he had been honest about and said he hadn't even heard of Takuya Yamashiro, a long-dead hero from the very start of the hero age, who had gone by the name of Spider-Man, the emissary from Hell. The early age heroes had really not cared much how their names and nicknames sounded. According to his Kirishima, the abilities of this Spider-Man had resembled IZUKU quite a lot. What the entire question section, up until All Might returned and put an end to further discussion so they could focus on the next round, ended with was a relatively friendly introduction to the rest of the class. It felt surreal to IZUKU. Like, the other shoe was about to drop at any second. Making a few friends was one thing, but this. It was as if the class actually liked him. It was a feeling IZUKU hadn't felt in. Actually, he had never felt like this before. No school class IZUKU had ever been in had just flat out liked him. In his previous schools, there had been students who didn't pick on him, but never anyone who actually liked him. No friends, no one who had actually just been glad to see him on principle. Dear God, it was a wonderful feeling. All Might is Toshinori Yagi. Yes, Venom groaned. No need to be so damn loud about it. That. What? How? IZUKU was currently in his room, alone in the apartment. Venom had waited until they came home to drop whatever news he had been sitting on for the day. That news, being that All Might was actually his manager, the sickly Toshinori Yagi. A man who, frankly, looked like he was at death's door. IZUKU tried to process it. Are you sure? It seemed so. Impossible that All Might could actually be a guy who looked like he would fall over by a stiff breeze. Of course we are sure. He also has some sort of injury in his gut that causes him horrible pain all the time. Now, we could be wrong, given we didn't understand the words, but didn't Toshinori at some point suffer an injury that made him the way he is now? He looked pretty normal in those old photos you were looking at back when we first encountered him. IZUKU, still frozen, tried to contemplate this. Yes. He had read that Toshinori had an injury that destroyed his health, but... IZUKU pulled out his phone with shaking hands, then went through his browsing history, and soon found what he was looking for. An All Might article from a couple of weeks back. There it was, a picture of Toshinori Yagi, looking kinda like a starving ghoul. If he really is as sickly as this, how can he do the stuff All Might does? Venom snorted. His quirk, obviously. At the very least, it allows him to drastically bulk up in muscle. He probably changes between his regular standard form and the huge muscle-bound titan the world knows him as. That wasn't impossible. There were quirks who worked like that. Hell, in his quest to try and restore his books, he had encountered no less than 36 heroes who had a power set of that variety. But with such amazing power? None of what he had seen came close. As he looked down on the photo of Toshinori Yagi talking to the press, a thought suddenly struck IZUKU, and he quickly went to Toshinori's Wikipedia page. It wasn't large, but it did exist. More to the point, it also covered his injury with nice before and after comparison shots. Toshinori before the injury was a relatively average man, perhaps with muscles a bit larger than an average salaryman, judging by his build. It was kinda hard to say for sure given his clothing. Two details struck him, though. Details he had never really noticed before, but now that he knew what to look for, they seemed incredibly obvious. Toshinori's eyes had been pretty normal, a bit sunken in due to age, mayhaps. Just like All Might's had been. Then, after the injury, his eyes had gotten more and more sunken in until they seemed completely surrounded by shadows. Just like All Might. IZUKU actually remembered having visited forums about half a decade ago talking about this very topic, how All Might's eyes had begun to change. Most attributed it to his age finally catching up with him. IZUKU had argued against that since he wasn't that old. Was he? Now that he had heard Venom's information. The connection was there, obvious as the sun. The second thing he noticed was the way Toshinori styled his hair. Compared to All Might's ever windswept mane, he had very messy hair. He also had two long, blonde bangs down across his face. Bangs that were about as long as All Might's iconic V hairstyle. He could feel a knot in his stomach. It's true. He really is Toshinori Yagi. Of course it is. We told you he was. IZUKU ignored his tone and just tried to process it. After a while, another question popped up into his head. One he had asked himself in passing once before but not really focused on. Why was All Might suddenly teaching at UA? He remembered being really surprised by the news that All Might was becoming a teacher at UA. But he had been so happy he had gotten in he hadn't really delved into it. He had also been dealing with the reveals about Venom, which had also taken up much of his time. So, what did they know? All Might suddenly started teaching at UA, years after suffering a critical injury that completely changed his appearance and put him in constant pain all the time. He did not start teaching that year because of some whim. He had to have a reason behind it. But what? What could the reason possibly be? There was an answer here, one IZUKU felt like he only needed one single other piece to figure out. All Might had become a teacher. He had become a teacher this year. That meant there was someone in this year's students who he wanted to personally teach. Or keep his eye on. A horrible fear that All Might knew about his secret and was keeping an eye on him specifically shot through his mind before he crushed the idea hard. It was flat-out paranoid to think anyone else knew. Only him, Venom, and Mom knew. No one else. No, it had to be one of the other students, but who and why? Who did he know that All Might be interested in? The fact was that he didn't know anyone who fit that description, but he did know someone who Toshinori Yagi was interested in. Uraraka. The first time he met Uraraka had been on the beach, the same time he had first seen Toshinori Yagi. She had been jogging behind him as he drove past him. Why would All Might be interested in Uraraka? IZUKU froze as a sentence once again ran through his mind. Yeah. It's a fused quirk from my parents. It all fell into place. Uraraka had a quirk that was a fusion between two different quirks that, by her own admittance, was a mix between her parents. One of which happened to be a freakishly strong power quirk. He put his phone to his face as he went on YouTube. He didn't really need to check the next part out. He had seen videos of All Might more than enough times to remember them perfectly. He quickly found an old video showcasing a fight between All Might and a villain with the ability to turn into incredibly hard steel. As All Might prepared his strike, yellow lightning burst around his arm. It didn't happen that often, but they were there when All Might really put his back into it. Lightning. Just before a blow. He remembered the punch that had almost caved in his ribs and the pink lightning that had surrounded it. It was so obvious. Uraraka Ochako was All Might's daughter. He had joined UA as a teacher to train her and help her reach her full potential. That was why he had chosen this year to become a teacher. As IZUKU, Ida, and Uraraka sat and ate lunch together the next day, IZUKU was still trying to wrap his head around it all. There had been stuff during the start of the day, where they had chosen a class president, and with 2 votes, from him and Uraraka, Ida had become tied with Momo for the most votes, the 2 of them being the only ones with more votes than anyone else. It all seemed so unimportant to IZUKU at the moment as he tried to look at Uraraka and really take her in detail without it looking like he was leering at her. It was both a simple and a very hard thing to wrap his head around. On one hand, the fact that All Might have a family somewhere wasn't the most difficult thing to believe. On the other hand, it was difficult to imagine that Uraraka was actually All Might's daughter. IZUKU felt like he was a terrible friend, but frankly, other than her quirk, it didn't seem like Uraraka had inherited anything from All Might. The way her hair flowed down was different, her colors, both in skin, hair, and eyes, weren't anything like All Might's, and though she had muscles, whether they be trained or due to her quirk, her build was very different than All Might's. He intensely looked at her eyebrows for any sign she might have dyed them, but if so, he couldn't see a strand that wasn't completely brown. In every way, it looked like her natural hair color. If Uraraka really was All Might's child, then the symbol of peace had left very little of himself in her. Except. It all came back to the quirk, the enormous powers that did not lie. He had gone through several hundred videos of All Might through the years, and he was more certain than ever that her powers were the same as All Might's. He was suddenly pulled out of his thoughts by Ida. "Midoriya, are you well?" "What?" He turned his head to look at Ida, who was looking at him with a concerned expression. "Are you feeling well? Something is very clearly bothering you." He motioned towards IZUKU with one of his arms in a needlessly dramatic way. Uraraka, currently in the process of speedily devouring her rather large meal, also turned to look at him with concerned eyes while chewing a fish in her mouth. IZUKU, caught on the spot, panicked and blurted out the first thing that came to his mind. "Uraraka, how do you know Toshinori Yagi?" IZUKU winced. That was how he brought this topic up. Idiot. Uraraka, for her part, was completely caught off guard by the question and caught something in her throat, leading to her beginning to cough. Ida slammed his hand on her back, helping her cough up her food. Finally, once she was done, she just stared at IZUKU in what was something between horror and shock. "What? Smooth, man. Real smooth. I. What the hell was he going to say? Hey Uraraka, is All Might your dad? You probably don't remember, but the entrance exam wasn't actually the first time we saw each other. Nearly a year ago, we encountered each other near a beach filled with trash and metal. Uraraka went pale. I was there to pick up a replacement door for our bathroom when on the back trip I passed you as you were out training, with Toshinori Yagi. He winced again. Sorry, I haven't brought it up before. I just remembered it, and it's been bugging me ever since then. If IZUKU hadn't been too busy trying to read Uraraka's expression, he probably would have realized and been shocked by just how easily he had just lied to someone to their face. As it was, he was instead reading Uraraka as she desperately seemed to try and spin a story. Before she could answer though, Ida butted in. Truly? All Might's own manager? You really are well connected, Uraraka. Uraraka blushed. Well, to answer the question, I first met Yagi-san back when I enrolled in All Might's charity program for poor students. It took a couple of seconds rummaging through his vast knowledge of All Might lore before the details about said charity program popped back into his skull. Ida, however, wasn't as knowledgeable. I'm sorry, but I must admit I don't know about the charity program which you speak of. Uraraka gave a weak, forced smile. It's alright, most probably don't. Anyway, it's a program to help young students who can't really pay the bills to study in the big cities like Mustafa and Tokyo. Yes. IZUKU was starting to see it now. So you need the program to be able to study in Mustafa then? She scratched the back of her head in an awkward manner. Yeah, my family isn't exactly that well off. It felt off, no alien to sit there and pick apart Uraraka's story, piece by piece. In my final year of middle school, I applied for financial help to come to live here in Mustafa, since, well, I was planning on entering UA, and that meant I kinda had to live in the city, you know? Made sense. Anyway, I kind of met Yagi-san the day I moved here, and, well, after some stuff, we struck up a friendship, and he helped me train for UA. It was a good, solid story that didn't have any giant obvious holes. It would also mean that Uraraka got all her current money through an All Might charity, rather than, say, directly from All Might's own bank account. That way, if someone looked through the girl's finances, they couldn't directly trace them to All Might personally, just his charity. I must admit, I am not familiar with Toshinori Yagi beyond the name, but if he was your trainer, he must be quite an effective one. And to do so while stewarding all of All Might's paperwork and office. He must be a spectacular worker. Uraraka blushed, while IZUKU realized he hadn't even thought about that. All Might was still doing all his heroics while training up someone who could potentially become as strong as he was. That he did that, on top of his injury, truly was a testament to the grandness that was All Might. Yeah. He's the main reason I'm as strong as I am. She smiled. A silence arose as the three went back to eating for a bit, IZUKU dwelling on what Uraraka told him. He felt like a shitty friend for assuming that most of what Uraraka said were lies or half-truths. But really, was he any different? He also had his secrets with Venom. Secrets that he would take with him to his grave if he could. Secrets he would lie to his friends about. He was brought out of his musings by Venom, who manifested on IZUKU's shoulder. Speaking of secret connections, what about you, Tenya? IZUKU's study of your name suggested a rather interesting history behind your family. Ida stared at him, seemingly weighing his answer. So, you two have delved deeply into my family history, have you? He sounded serious but not particularly angry. IZUKU swallowed. Well, not really delved, but I did look up the Ida family. Uraraka looked with a bit of confusion, then, still with a bit of food stuck on her cheek, she beamed. Wait, Ida, are you a rich kid? She seemed to find that fascinating, judging by the way she looked at him like she had just stumbled into a beast of legend. IZUKU was interested too, to be honest, but he had looked into the Ida family. What he was interested to hear about was his exact connection to them. Ida kinda got an awkward nervous expression under the gazes of curiosity, but finally, he sighed. I don't really like people knowing about it, so I try and hide it, but... He paused, presumably for dramatic effect. Yes, mine is a renowned hero family. And I am the second son. Ida turned to IZUKU. Tell me, Midoriya, am I correct in assuming you are familiar with the hero Ingenium? Of course. Ingenium, real name Ida Tensei, is 183 centimeters tall, has dark blue hair, and was born on the 22nd of July. His quirk is Engine, which lets him put out powerful bursts of speed from his elbows that allow him to move at enormous speeds. He has exactly 65 sidekicks employed at his office in Tokyo. IZUKU was about to continue, but Ida cut him off. How very informed you are. He then put his head backwards while pushing up his glasses against his nose bridge, while wearing a smile that beamed pride. But yes, that is Ingenium, the pride of my family and my older brother. Wow. Uraraka beamed. He is a hero who leads people with an unwavering adherence to rules and regulations, a truly exemplary and beloved hero. It was my admiration for my brother that inspired my own goal of becoming a hero. He smiled that prideful smile for a second. He turned to IZUKU and was about to say something when, out of the blue, an alarm went off. Danger. What? Suddenly a loud robotic voice called out. Security level 3 has been broken. All students, please evacuate in an orderly fashion. Security level 3? IZUKU remembered reading the school rules and what it said about security levels. Security level 3 meant someone had not only infiltrated the campus but also this very building. He could feel it. No, he could feel him. As everyone around them began to push and shove on the way to the door, IZUKU was frozen to his chair, as he just sat there in shock and just observed the thing with morbid fascination as he felt him move through the building. It was potent. Powerful. It was the hatred he felt towards Katsuki, as if that torch had been a small sun. It was hatred, unlike anything IZUKU had ever experienced or felt in his life. It was loathing of everyone and everything, it was condemnation of him and all his peers, and it was as pure and clean hatred as the human race had ever had. Wow. Now that is some real hate. We've not seen these levels since the rebellion against Null. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. He was gone. IZUKU began breathing again. He hadn't even realized he'd stopped. Around him, the mass of humans kept pushing all around, but he didn't rise. The threat was gone. There was more that followed in the cafeteria. Ida calmed the masses down with the proclamation that it had only been the mass media who had infiltrated the school. He knew better. Clever. Using those foolish, annoying, useless media people as a distraction. Mayhaps even as a cover. Unfortunately for him, we were here. Yeah. He didn't know if UA staff knew that a real intruder had been inside the building or not, but if not, well, he'd have to tell them. The rest of the day was a blur for IZUKU. Ida got elected president over Momo after him calming the school. Aizawa had listened to him and actually given a real thanks for the info. Ida and Uraraka had invited him to hang out at McDonald's after school, but IZUKU had lied and said he had something he had to do that day. Truth was, he just wanted some time alone. Well, as alone as he could be. Exciting, isn't it? What, a villain sneaking inside the school? IZUKU distinctly got the feeling he had when Venom rolled his eyes at him. Obviously, the man was a scout, a vanguard preparing the foundation for a future conflict. This is how you open a war, IZUKU. War. It was kinda a melodramatic way of putting it. Wasn't it? It's just a villain, Venom. Heroes will deal with him. This isn't a war. All conflicts are wars, IZUKU. It's merely a matter of scale. You will learn that lesson in due time. The day that, in hindsight, would be one of the great turning points in IZUKU's life started the same as any other day at UA. Being taught theory, math, history, and all the other non-physical classes UA had to offer. As was usual, it was only after lunch that their basic hero training would begin. Now, for today's basic hero training. Aizawa began in his usual dull tone. For this exercise, I, All Might and one other will supervise. So, another special class then, IZUKU mused. It had to be if 3 teachers were to be there. Behind him, Sito asked the obvious. What are we doing exactly? Picking up a card and holding it up for all to see, Aizawa continued in his usual deadpan tone. Today we're preparing you for disaster relief, from fires to floods. Today is rescue training. As if to punctuate what he had just said, the golden card flashed the word rescue in the light of the sun. Seemingly assuming that Aizawa was done talking, the class immediately began to chatter. For about 10 seconds anyway, before Aizawa shut them down again with a glowing red glare. I'm not done yet, he said in a tone that promised pain for anyone who didn't keep their mouths shut. Putting down his card, he instead picked up a small remote and with a click, the shelves with the boxes that held the rest of the class's costumes slid out of the wall. It's up to each of you whether you want to wear your costumes for this exercise, as some of them are ill-equipped for this kind of activity. Finally, the training area is a bit remote, so we'll be going by bus. That's all, now get ready. And with that, he nonchalantly walked out of the room, hands in his pockets. Rescue training, eh? Well, it's not a glorious battle, but we'll take it over more boring-ass lectures. For Izuku's part, he was stoked. No, more than stoked. He knew most of the rest of the class had been looking forward to combat training more than anything else. Not him. This was what he had become a hero for, not for the battles or victories, but to help people. Memories of seeing the video of All Might's debut time and again as a child flowed through his head. But there was also the memory of the night he met Stick-san and how the man in red had helped him when he needed it. That was the kind of hero he wanted to be. After everyone had gotten dressed and was on their way to the bus, Izuku walked up to Uraraka, intending to start up a conversation, when he noticed something. Your cape. Oh, right. She absent-mindedly fingered the hole in her outfit where the buttons attaching her cape had been. I've sent in a request for a new outfit that's less constraining, and since I'm not really gonna use this one in the future, I thought getting it repaired would be a waste of time. Made sense. For one thing, Izuku had learned quickly over the last few days that it could feel really humiliating wearing a skin-tight outfit. Normally he was fine, but whenever someone decided checking him out was just fine, he became red as a tomato and generally had a lot of trouble concentrating. Thankfully, none had done so while he was doing something important. Not yet, anyway. As they were reaching the bus, Ida was already there, with a whistle, and motioning. Line up according to your ID numbers. Fill those seats in an orderly fashion, everyone. Wow, Ida is really into the whole class president thing. Yeah, he's really going full throttle. After spending 2 minutes lining up according to their ID numbers, it turned out the bus was actually completely different than regular buses, with a layout that simply didn't work with the neat and orderly setup they had. As everyone just found a seat wherever they wanted, Izuku patted Ida, who had just seen his meticulous work undone and seemed kinda depressed about it, on the back. Opposite of them, Tsuyu started up a conversation with Uraraka in a blunt, awkward manner that made Izuku seem subtle and great at conversations. I generally say what's on my mind, Ochako-chan. Okay. What is it? Tsuyu turned to look directly with a huge, yet also somewhat relaxed, grin. Your quirk reminds me of All Might's. Wow. And Izuku had thought he was blunt. Both Izuku and Ven turned their heads towards the pair as Uraraka stuttered in shock. Why you think so? I mean. Kirishima, sitting to Tsuyu's left, butted in. Hold up, Tsuyu, All Might doesn't get hurt by his own power though. They're already way different in that. Inside his mind, Venom snorted. She's young, she'll grow into it yet. Kirishima followed up on his blatant show of inexperience with praise. But still, that sort of simple strength-enhancing quirk is really cool. You can do a lot of awesome stuff with it. He got a somewhat sullen expression on his face as he lifted his arm up, and with a metallic sound, his arm seemed to turn into skin-colored metal. Not like mine at all. Hardening is great in a fight, but it's really boring. I think it's pretty cool though. It's more than enough to fully go pro. It was a bland compliment that didn't actually address any of the things Kirishima didn't like about his quirk. Surprisingly, it was Venom who gave some actual advice. Real battle is about efficiency, not flashiness or pointless shows of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Yours is a very useful power that should allow you to screw over most kinds of enemies with ease. Also, by virtue of possessing the mundane power of being bulletproof, it's one of the most useful power sets in this group. Yeah, that's kinda what I said. It's great for battle but not much else really. Being a pro means you have to worry about popularity too, you know? You can't only think about how good you are in a fight. Isn't that literally how the second-ranking hero of this country rose to such height? By caring only about battle and solving as many cases as he possibly can, ignoring everything else? Touché. But that kinda illustrates my point. Endeavor has one of the flashiest quirks in Japan. Incredibly powerful, but also surprisingly versatile. Dang, this guy's dense. Well, it wasn't wrong, but frankly, IZUKU agreed with Venom. Todoroki Enji had not risen to the second rank because he was charismatic or flashy. He had risen to the top 2 by being better than almost all the rest. That wouldn't have changed if his quirk was less flashy. Speaking of endeavor, I'd say that the guy with the best mix of flashy and strong quirk in class would be Todoroki. And maybe Bakugo. Before either IZUKU, Venom, or surprisingly enough Shoto, who had suddenly taken an interest in their conversation. Could interject, Tsuyu gave another of her blunt statements. Bakugo's so unhinged, though. He'll never get popular. You wanna fight, Frogface? Katsuki barked as he jumped up from his seat, hand on the railing as he leaned menacingly over it. Or tried to. The effect, along with his hair, had him look more like a chihuahua barking over a fence. IZUKU blinked. Had Katsuki always looked so non-threatening? See? Tsuyu said, nonchalantly pointing at Katsuki without even looking at him. Venom was chuckling at Katsuki's outburst, but it was what happened next that got him really cackling. Namely, Kaminari Denki decided to make some sport of the easy target that was Bakugo leaning on the railing above them. It's only been a brief while since our socialization commenced, and yet I am apodictically cognizant of your personality, redolent as it is of a turd getting steamed in a sewer. Yeah, okay, mister. Vocabulary, how about I fight you instead? Enough. Aizawa, who had been napping during the trip, finally bestirred himself to shut down the argument with a glare of shining crimson. Everyone quieted down before Aizawa added, also, we're here, everyone look sharp now, okay? That last part could have sounded inspirational, but coming from Aizawa, it was as unenthusiastic as everything else he said. The here he was referring to turned out to be a giant park. The whole thing looked like an enormous theme park, or at least it would have if not for the fact one of the zones was on fire, and another 2 zones seemed like all the buildings in them had collapsed. Venom's, and to a lesser extent IZUKU's eyes and attention were instantly drawn to the fire zone. As everyone was standing just looking at it and marveling, their eyes were glued to the dancing flames. We take it back. This is going to bloody suck. The third teacher turned out to be a woman, though the only way one could know that was if one were familiar with her already. She was dressed in an attire that could best be described as a mix between an astronaut spacesuit, a poncho, and a down jacket. On her head was a giant black dome with only 2 large white eyes showing anything of her face. It's the Space Hero 13. She's a famous hero who does all her best work in rescue work. IZUKU was about to go on in his regular way of just listing up everything he knew about said villain but was interrupted by Uraraka, who similarly squealed in delight at the prospect of meeting 13. Oh my gosh, it's actually 13. I can't believe it. Uraraka beamed, looking at the space hero, in a way that IZUKU was pretty sure was how he had looked when All Might had first walked into their classroom. It was a look of pure, untainted admiration. It seemed Uraraka was a big fan. 13 was about to introduce herself when Aizawa interjected and walked up to her. "Wait, where's All Might?" In response, 13 waved him over until they were right up against each other, and she answered in a very hushed, quiet tone. Izuku, hypersensitive to sounds as he was, didn't have too many problems listening in on the conversation even though he wasn't trying. "Well? About that senpai. It seems he reached his limit during his morning commute. He's currently resting in the break room." Izuku froze. Limit? It would seem All Might is limited to how much he can operate at the moment. Well, isn't that interesting? Izuku, still in shock, didn't answer. This little piece of information completely changed what he thought he knew about All Might at the moment. All Might had a freaking time limit for how much he could operate. That completely recontextualized why he was here teaching. Izuku had merely thought he was here to teach his own child, to make sure she reached the heights he himself did. And he was, just not in the way Izuku had first thought. If All Might was so injured he had a limit for how much he could operate. He was interrupted in his train of thoughts by 13, who had turned to the class and begun talking. Izuku actually missed her opening, so in-depth was he considering the new question, before he realized his teacher was saying something. "Of you are aware. My quirk is called Black Hole. As you can probably guess from that name, it can suck in and tear apart anything. Wow. An actual power that could be used to end all life on this planet. Color us impressed." 13's continuation wasn't that far from Venom's assessment. It is remarkably useful in disaster work and capture. However, it is also a power that can kill incredibly easily. She gave a look from left to right, looking over all of them. It was hard to read her expression, but as she continued, her voice became more somber. "I'm certain there are many of you who are similar. With powers that can easily take others' lives, even without intention. In our superpowered society, the use of quirks is heavily restricted and monitored. It may seem like this system of ours is a stable one. But, we must never forget that it only takes one wrong move for someone with an uncontrollable quirk to kill someone, intent be damned." Yeah. That wasn't wrong at all. It was an aspect of superhero work that was generally not discussed much, at least not in Japan. Certain other countries had much bigger problems with it, but cases where heroes accidentally caused a death or intentionally killed someone in self-defense or while protecting others happened. Being a hero didn't give you permission to kill, but when you had thousands upon thousands of superpowered people together, sometimes, the worst happened. One of the few cases his mom had done that Izuku remembered clearly from his childhood was a case where a hero's protective shield had ricocheted bullets and killed 4 criminal gunmen. He had been cleared and found not guilty, as it was clearly self-defense, but even that open-and-shut case had still gone to court. As it should. They did not live in a world where heroes should be allowed the authority to murder people. During Aizawa's physical fitness test, you were taught to learn about your hidden potential. During All Might's battle training, you experienced the danger that your powers pose to others. This class will teach you a new perspective. Here, you will learn how to utilize your powers to help people and save lives. Izuku smiled at her words, as this was precisely why he wanted this class. This was why he wanted to be a hero. His bright spirit and smile withered with her next line. "Your powers are neither made nor meant to inflict harm on others. I hope you leave here today with the understanding that you're made to help people." As 13 finished her speech and got some applause, from Uraraka, who seemed to really love the hero, and from the always prim and proper Ida, Izuku felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. It was a good speech, one that encapsulated everything Izuku himself felt about hero work. But it was also wrong on one point, at least with regard to Izuku himself. His powers were both made and meant to hurt people. Memories flashed through his head, memories of Venom explaining the origin of his race and the being that had created them for conquest across the stars. However he used these powers Venom gave him, he was different than his classmates, who had all been born with their powers. natural and blameless. No blood rested on the origin of their powers. Very much unlike Venom. He was still trying to bury, and/or deal with his overall thoughts on the less savory parts of Venom's history, when three things happened. The first was that suddenly, and without warning, he could feel the presence from yesterday. The man who hated. The second was that, almost against his own will, his body forcibly snapped around to face the new threat, instinctually falling into a combat stance IZUKU had never used. And thirdly and finally, it was there, down a set of stairs in the plaza that was between all the zones. Several dozen black and purple portals appeared as dozens of people walked through them. Villains was IZUKU's first thought. Panic was the second. The same feelings that had taken over him in the forest, less than a week ago, yet now seemed like they had happened a lifetime ago. Fear, panic, and doubt shot through IZUKU's mind. But there was also a surge of adrenaline, a readiness for battle like he had felt before he and Katsuki had come to blows. The men and women who stepped out through the portals were a ragtag bunch, but almost all looked pretty threatening, some with guns, knives, or other weapons-related quirks, and some with mutations, whether animal or more random ones. Two stood out amongst the group, though. A huge man dressed only in a set of ripped pants, with blackish-purple skin crisscrossed with red veins. His muscles were such that they rivaled All Might himself in how ripped he looked, but the most notable features he had were his head, with a huge, metal-encased beak full of jagged teeth, and on his head, in one of the most grotesque things IZUKU had ever seen in his life, was his brain, exposed with no skull or skin, pumping and pulsing. The one who stole IZUKU's attention, however, was the man. The one who hated. His eyes locked out to him, and IZUKU froze. That's the guy? That's the source of this hatred? He looked absolutely ridiculous. Tall, with matted white hair, the guy was dressed in a black shirt and pants that looked like they were someone's pajamas. But the ridiculousness didn't stop there. Around his arms, neck, shoulders, and head, he wore detached hands that were holding on to him. It could have looked somewhat creepy, but several of them have silly, red cables connecting them, and one of them was over the front of his head, covering his face and looking absolutely ridiculous. Finally, as if encapsulating the Narmi look, he wore basic, standard, worn red sneakers and was hunched over as he walked. The look basically could all be summed up in one word. Bloody hell, he looks stupid. A bit more crass than IZUKU would have put it, but yeah, he looked really, really stupid. Right now, though, there was something more pressing about the man in question. Aizawa-sensei. That's the guy from the alarm incident. The guy in the pajamas. Several students, who hadn't quite grasped what was going on or even realized something was wrong, all turned to look at who IZUKU was yelling about. Aizawa, though, wasn't forthcoming with an explanation. 13. Protect the students. He yelled in a panicked, hoarse voice like he wasn't used to actually speaking loudly. What the heck are those? Kirishima asked, looking down on the invading group. More robots? Don't move, those are villains. Yeah, that's pretty bloody obvious, man. They're here to kill us, most likely. Or try to anyway. Immediately after finishing, he fussed his head around IZUKU's. His voice was nonchalant, as if being attacked by a sudden dozen villains who wanted to murder them was just a regular occurrence to be taken in stride. Those words didn't exactly bring calmness to the rest of the class, but before any true panicked reactions could be had, the source of the misty black portals made itself known, as a head made of the stuff suddenly materialized in the air, overlooking them, its eyes like yellow, burning slits with yellow energy trailing behind them. 13 and Eraserhead, is it? As his eyes narrowed, IZUKU felt his eyes scanning him and the rest of the class. According to the staff schedule I got the other day, All Might was supposed to be here. Yet he is not. The pajamas guy didn't take the news well. Where is he? We came all this way, brought so many playmates. All Might. The symbol of peace. Isn't here? The guy's head shot back up, and his entire spine went up and rigid, like he was a pole. I wonder if some dead kids will bring him here. It was. It was interesting to be able to feel him as he changed his mind. Seconds before there was nothing more than hatred, a burning loathing of everything around him. Then, like a switch, his emotions turned to something else. A feeling IZUKU hadn't felt before, yet instinctually, he somehow knew what it was. Killer intent. But not focused on anyone or anything. Just kinda there. IZUKU should have felt horrified by his words. Yet he didn't. At all. There was no conviction in them. Despite all this guy's hatred, he just didn't feel anything one would have expected from a guy who just proclaimed he wanted to murder kids. Murder him, IZUKU realized. He should have felt threatened the same way he felt by the rest of these guys. But he just wasn't. At all. He was like a child throwing a tantrum. By his side, Kaminari stepped up and looked down upon the congregation of villains. Unlike IZUKU, he was obviously shaken by Shigaraki's words. He shook in fear, and his eyes scanned the villains as if looking for someone or something. Most likely he was trying to figure out exactly how many there were. He was afraid. Scared. Terrified. IZUKU put his hand on his shoulder. He tried to think up something positive to say to calm him, but before he could, Kaminari, seemingly snapped out of his fear by IZUKU's hand, suddenly stopped shaking. His look changed from fear to resigned. "We'll just have to fight then." The blonde boy gritted his teeth and clenched his hands into fists as he looked down on the villains, who now seemed to be considering their next move. "Ain't happening," Aizawa said in a tone that would broker no argument. 13. Get the students out, and try calling the school. One of these villains must be jamming the sensors. There's a large chance that one of them is an electric type causing a disturbance preventing the signal. Kaminari. When you get outside, try using your quirk to signal for help. Right, got it. Kaminari responded. Aizawa then stepped up to the edge of the stairways, obviously preparing to fight. Fear for what might happen to Aizawa suddenly shot through IZUKU's mind. Wait, sensei, you can't fight all of them alone. Against that many, not even you can nullify all of their quirks. Not to mention your battle style is erasure and capture, head-on battle isn't your dash. Aizawa cut him off. No good hero is a one-trick pony. Then, before he attacked, he gave one final line. 13, take care of the students. Then, with a short burst of running, he jumped down the stairs towards the plaza. Aizawa did remarkably well in his assault. Frankly, though, a better strategy would have been to have the students with ranged capability back him up. But as it was, he had decided to make this a one-man show. Oh well. They would need to fight anyhow. The presence of a teleporter made sure of that. Still, they had bested the teleporter before, even before the final bonding. They would do it again. Maybe break his neck too this time, instead of just knocking this one out. As the students began their attempt at evacuation, IZUKU had to fight an urge, no, a need to jump down and back up Aizawa. He should fight. He should help Aizawa. Leaving him alone down there felt so utterly wrong. Those thoughts were interrupted by the teleporter, who suddenly materialized like a huge black sheet of black mist in front of the entrance. I'm sorry to say, but I cannot allow you to leave. The darkness said in a polite voice. Allow me to introduce ourselves. We are the League of Villains. Forgive our audacity, but today, we came here to UA, High School of Heroism. To end the life of All Might, the symbol of peace. IZUKU froze. This guy. Unlike the Hands guy, this guy was the real deal. An actual killer in mind and soul. IZUKU could feel it from him. Conviction, steadfastness, and a total disregard for them and their lives. This guy would kill them if he could. He would kill All Might. Not happening. We were under the impress dash. He was cut off as two figures launched themselves forward, and punched him in the face and gut. Or at least where his face and gut had been. IZUKU's fist hit him straight where his head had been, but it simply went through his mist, as the man dematerialized into mist and reappeared a bit in front of them, outside their immediate reach. IZUKU didn't turn to look at the other person, but a flash of pink in the corner of his vision told him it was Ashido Mina. That was close. The mist guy said as if he hadn't almost had his lights knocked out. He narrowed his eyes. Yes. Students though you may be, you are indeed of the best caliber. Begone. Without warning, and so fast that IZUKU didn't even have time to react, black mist surged forward and around them. IZUKU could feel a hand close around his arm and rip him backward and off his feet, away from the mist at incredible speed, but it wasn't enough. The mist engulfed him and the owner of the hand completely in a maelstrom of black mist, even as they moved backward. For what seemed like far longer than it probably was, IZUKU floated through a void. The only thing he could feel for sure was the arm that still firmly held onto his arm. Suddenly, and without warning, light returned, and they were back in the world of the living. IZUKU immediately notices two things. The first was that he was falling. The second, that he was maybe 6 meters above ground, or rather a rooftop. And the third was that below, there were 5 people, all of whom had what, with a shock, he realized were machine guns. They were waiting for them to hit the ground to riddle them with bullets. The shock almost overwhelmed him, but instincts, his innate will to survive, took over. The arm that wasn't clamped down on shot up, and a line of black web hit the ground by the feet of one of the guys. Then, with a pull, IZUKU changed their direction and instead of landing in the middle of the 5, IZUKU instead slammed into the unfortunate villain. The hand let go as they hit the guy, and IZUKU heard someone kick off from the ground beside him. Keep moving, don't stop. He did so, and rather than turning around, he jumped sideways. Seconds later, a small hail of bullets flew into the spot where his body had just been and over the unfortunate guy IZUKU had slammed into. The sound from the explosion of each bullet was a ping of pain in IZUKU's head, but he ignored it. As he flew, IZUKU turned midair to get a look at his assailants. The sight that greeted him was Mina Ashido having moved so that she was between 3 of the gunmen and a final 4th one, who she was in the process of attacking, having apparently ripped his machine gun out of his hand and tossed it over the edge of the building. One gunman had trained his weapon at Mina and the guy she was tangling with, but he hesitated at the prospect of shooting and possibly hitting his buddy. The other 2 were attempting to reload, having used both their clips trying to kill him. One gunman had trained his weapon at Mina and the guy she was tangling with, but he hesitated at the prospect of shooting and possibly hitting his buddy. The other 2 were attempting to reload, having used both their clips trying to kill him. IZUKU didn't need to consider who to attack first. A black web line slammed into the gun of the hesitating gunman, and with enormous strength, it was wrenched out of his hands and went sky-high. The man screamed in pain, probably having broken his index finger. IZUKU ignored it, and instead, 2 new black lines slammed into the ground where the 2 men who were reloading were standing. IZUKU hit the ground right in front of them, and his hands shot up and closed around the guns, and with 2 crunches, he broke both of them in his grip. IZUKU had made one mistake, however. He assumed the guy he had just disarmed was without a method of attack. A giant fist of water slammed into IZUKU from the side, sending him flying through the air and over the edge of the building. His hand wrenched up, and a line attached itself to the side of the building, and instead of just falling, he slammed into the side of the structure. He did not stop to catch his breath, though. Instead, he forced himself to climb back up, ignoring any pain from just having been hit by the water. He vaulted over the edge. What greeted him was the sight of the water fist guy lying on the ground and clutching his side, where Mina had just punched him, having already dealt with the guy she had been tangling with. The 2 other villains were running to help him but stopped and turned towards him as he came up over the side. For a moment, it was a moment of calm as they just stood there staring at each other. Then, with a glance at the other, both nodded, and they split up. One went towards IZUKU, while the other went towards Mina. The man who went towards IZUKU changed, his suit, which IZUKU only now realized was an army uniform with bulletproof armor, was shredded as he transformed, becoming larger and bigger, his muscles bulging, becoming a mountain of a man. With a roar, he jumped forward, and lifting his hands over his head, he slammed them down on IZUKU, who, panicked, brought his arms up to block. The force wasn't all that impressive actually. IZUKU blinked as the man recoiled, seemingly in pain, then after planting his feet, brought his hand forward in a massive punch. IZUKU stopped it dead in its tracks with an open palm, simply catching it midair. He then grabbed the arm and threw him over his shoulder straight down onto the rooftop, cracking the stone. The large man grunted in pain but was quickly silenced as IZUKU brought his hand down and punched him in the face, the man going out with a single blow. For a few seconds, he just stared at the guy who went down so easily. Then, the sound of battle shook him back to reality, and he snapped around towards Mina, who also was finishing up her fight, the other guy lying on the ground having taken a power blow to the head. "Are you okay, Midori?" she asked in a worried tone as she jogged up to him. "Midori? Yeah, I'm fine. You?" She grinned. "No injuries here. I was worried about you, though, when you flew over the edge." She smiled at him. "You know how to handle yourself in a fight, have you been in many?" "Not really." "Huh. Well, you did great anyway." Apparently catching something on the ground, she bent down and picked something up. One of the villain's guns. "Uzis," she exclaimed. That's not really a good sign. He would take her word for it. He didn't really know gun types enough to call it something other than a machine gun. "So, what do we do now? We can't just leave these guys loose and then move on." IZUKU blinked. Then he realized that he wasn't done here and hastily began to go and web up every single one of the villains. As he walked from villain to villain, Mina kept talking. "Who are these guys anyway? They can't seriously think they could beat All Might, could they?" IZUKU went cold. "Time limit. All Might had a time limit. You remember that commotion with the news reporters yesterday?" "Yeah. Oh right, you said something about that earlier." "Yeah. Those guys used that commotion as a distraction to break into UA. Probably to look at the schedules. They knew All Might would be here. They knew about his time limit and planned to attack him while he was vulnerable. I don't know about the hands guy. But the teleporting guy, of Black Mists? He didn't strike me as the kind of guy who would have gone through with this plan if he didn't think it could succeed. These guys probably think they could theoretically kill All Might. But he isn't even here. Yeah. He went even colder. But killing All Might isn't all they're after here. They separated us. They had this whole thing planned out and divided us up so we would be easier to deal with. They want to kill us. That's the second part of the plan." As she talked, Mina had lost all her cheerfulness, the normally preppy girl suddenly having turned really melancholic. She wasn't wrong, though. "Yes." A silence followed as IZUKU finished up webbing the gunman. He bent down over the final villain, the water fist guy, and with a shock and a wave of disgust at himself, he realized he hadn't just broken his index finger, he had ripped it clean off when he yanked the gun out of his hand. He had broken the leg of the guy he had landed on, but somehow seeing the blood flowing from where the finger had been made it really sink in for IZUKU. These guys wanted to kill them. This was a life and death battle. And all their classmates were in similar bouts. "We have to go save our classmates. All of them are in similar boats to us." A horrible thought went through his mind, and his hand went down and grasped the water guy by the bulletproof jacket. His webbing formed a seal around his hands as well and closed up the wound. He then hoisted the webbed-up man up, holding him upwards. "Do all of you have guns?" he said in a dark tone, Venom's darker version of his own voice bleeding into it. The man looked down on him, anger and hatred in his eyes. IZUKU gritted his teeth in a snarl. Fear went into the man's eyes. "I don't understand you," he said in English. "What? Oh, right." His gaze turned to the group. Now that he got a look at them, none of them seemed to be Japanese. Probably American or European. "Do all of you have guns?" he asked again, this time in English. The man hesitated for a moment, then, looking into IZUKU's white eyes, he answered. Our entire group does. The Japs don't. The Japs? Mina said in a very angry tone, like he had just horribly insulted her personally. The guy, seemingly thinking she was asking for clarification, answered. We were hired to do this job. All for One gave the big man 30 million if we helped him out with this project. Our group is here, while the rest of the people here are Japs from his own group. IZUKU and Mina just stared at him. All for One? Seriously? That All for One? Yeah, that guy. All for One. All for One himself. The most notorious Japanese villain in history was the brain behind this operation. That seemed... well, it made things far more complicated. If All for One was behind this, why isn't he here? How should I know? I'm not a bloody officer. I just do as I'm told. IZUKU was about to continue when Venom suddenly shot a warning through his head. Behind you. IZUKU, still holding the water guy, snapped around as, out of the air, on the opposite edge of the roof, a new figure materialized out of thin air in a flash of purple light. A very familiar figure. The newcomer was a woman dressed in the same military uniform as the rest, with a bulletproof vest as well, the only difference being it was a navy blue color instead of brown and green. In her hand, she held a regular gun, though it wasn't pointed upwards at any of them. She had long black hair, and though she had natural light skin, she obviously had a tan that had darkened. IZUKU recognized her immediately. The teleporting lady from the forest. For a second, they just stared at each other. Then she groaned in an exasperated manner. Seriously, Morris? You guys couldn't handle a couple of kids literally just out of middle school? The water guy, now identified as Morris, stiffened, then replied. Sorry, tell. Freaking Yankees. She shook her head. Then she turned her face to Mina. Ah. Black cat's brat, eh? That explains a lot. Then her eyes went to IZUKU. And you are? He stared at her, dumbfounded for a moment. Why? Why would I tell you that? Well, it's called proper manners, kid. Or maybe your mom never taught it to you. Anyway, She stopped dead in her tracks. That liquid. Oh shit. Her face went from annoyed to pissed in a second. It's you. You're that asshole who broke both my finger and my jaw. He did? Mina asked incredulously. Why? Who are you anyway? I'll explain later, IZUKU said quickly. Now was not the time to go into what had happened in the forest. Now they had to deal with this lady. He dropped Morris to the ground and assumed a combat stance. To his left, Mina did the same. Tell did not move to attack them. Not that she needed to, being a teleporter and all. Doubtlessly, she would be relying on that for this fight. Then, she disappeared into a flash of purple light. IZUKU tensed, assuming she would reappear somewhere nearby and attack, but she didn't. She left, Venom confirmed. She's not around here anymore. Did she run away? Mina asked in a baffled tone. The answer appeared in front of them roughly 20 seconds after she left, as she reappeared once more. But not alone. Along with her, she had brought two guys. One of them was dressed in a ridiculous yellow outfit, with a cross pattern over it. There were some red parts, as well as some steel sections, on his outfit. Two gauntlets around his hands, in particular, stand out. Over his eyes, he had a large green visor. All in all, he looked like a giant, yellow quilt. IZUKU had no idea who he was. The other guy, though. Oh shit. Mina swore. IZUKU, that's... I know, he replied in a tone far more squeaky than he'd have liked. The man was enormous. Gray, thick hide-like plates covered him from head to toe in place of skin. On his head, two horns, one in front of the other, with the front one being much, much larger. The only piece of cloth or equipment he wore was a ripped and tattered set of baggy jeans around his groin and upper legs. He could have looked comical to anyone who didn't know who he was anyway. "Thanks for helping me out here, Rhino. You're really doing me a solid here," Tell said in a cheerful tone while shooting daggers at IZUKU. "No problem, Tell, I'm always happy to help out my fellow liberators," the monster replied cheerfully. The man was Alexander Huvnn, better known as the Rhino. An American man with a death count in the tens of thousands. He was one of the most notorious criminals alive. A monster who had crushed countless heroes into the ground over the course of a criminal career spanning only a single year. Tell grinned. "Have fun, you too." She gave a wave to IZUKU and Mina before she teleported out. As Tell teleported out and left IZUKU, Mina, and Venom alone with Rhino and the yellow guy, a silence arose, as the two sides just stared at each other. IZUKU and Mina were both incredibly tense and on guard, both of them staring with complete scrutiny at the other duo, awaiting some attack or charge. On the opposite end, maybe 7 to 9 meters away on the other side of the roof, Rhino and his buddy seemed far calmer, collected, and at ease. It was Venom who broke the silence. "So, who is this exactly?" On instinct, IZUKU almost went into a tangent laying out all he knew of Rhino and his history. For once though, he bit the answer down. This wasn't the time to stand around like a moron and give a long-winded tangent. Rhino apparently felt differently. "Oh, of course, how rude of me. We haven't introduced ourselves yet. Allow me to rectify this error." He lifted his hand up nonchalantly, like he was an enthusiastic teacher motioning as he explained some problem or something before his class. "I'm the Rhino. And don't forget the part of it. There are plenty of Rhino-themed guys in the world. But there's only one of me." Well, that was true enough. The Rhino grinned, then he struck a bodybuilder pose as he continued. "My quirk is Rhino. Letting me do anything a Rhino can do. Like tank sniper shots to the head. Or shatter a street beneath my blows. Or survive explosions. Or dash, they get the point." His companion interrupted his rather inaccurate and inane comparisons. "Right. And this is my good buddy Shocker. He is a cripple. A genetic throwback to an earlier age, where humanity as a whole was weak and puny. A quirkless man with no abilities beyond that of the old human race." IZUKU, for the first time in the Rhino's ramblings, was genuinely thrown off guard. The shock of learning this guy was quirkless almost overshadowed the very personal sting of the comically ableist way Rhino described quirkless people. If Shocker took any offense to being described like this, he didn't show it. Instead, he kept his eyes firmly on IZUKU and Mina, obviously expecting an attack of some kind. "Wait, he's quirkless?" Mina interrupted in a surprised tone. "Then, what's with the costume?" "Ah, yes. Good question, Pink Girl." Unlike the rest of his kind, he did not contend to simply wallow in powerless obscurity or rage against the establishment that put those like him down, and passively resent them. No. He instead created his Shocker technology. The two teenagers and the alien stared at him. "Truly, the most eloquent of naming schemes we have here. Let me guess. It shocks people with bolts of lightning." "Nope, it produces explosions with compressed bursts of air." Venom sputtered before replying in an angry voice. "Then why is he called Shocker? He isn't shocking people at all. That name makes no goddamn sense." Shocker surprisingly agreed. The higher-ups decided on it." He shrugged his shoulders. "Personally, I wanted to be Soundwave, but the higher-ups told me to get bent when I suggested it. It is what it is." His voice turned darker as he raised one of his hands up and pointed it towards IZUKU and Mina. "Now, let's get this show on the road." IZUKU and Mina were both about to move when Rhino interjected. "Wait, Shocker, we can't start yet, they haven't introduced themselves yet. We can't start before introductions are over." Izuku and Mina just stared at him incredulously, while Shocker groaned. "Is this guy for real?" Venom asked in a tone like he couldn't believe the stupidity of this guy. "Unfortunately," Morris replied from the roof floor. Izuku had honestly kinda forgotten he was there. "Oh, hi Morris." Rhino replied cheerfully, seemingly having just noticed him. "You okay, buddy? I've got several broken ribs." He winced. "So it could have been better." "Ah, can't believe you lot got beaten up by middle schoolers." Shocker shook his head. "Christ, that's..." Mina made her move. So quickly that Izuku, even with his enhanced reflexes, had trouble keeping up. Mina darted to Izuku's side, spun him around as she grabbed his hand, and pulled him along as she sprinted towards the roof edge. "Web!" She screamed at him as they ran. Then, faster than Izuku would have believed, they were at the edge of the roof. Without even a hint of hesitation, she jumped off the edge, dragging Izuku along after her. Panic set in inside Izuku's mind as gravity took hold. For a small eternity, the ground came up, unavoidably and unstoppably. Then, by instinct, his hand shot upwards to the side and a black line sprang forth and attached itself to the top of one of the buildings on the other side. Almost instantly, the momentum of their fall veered sharply sideways as they began going downwards in a pendulum arc like they were swinging on a vine. As Mina's hand gripped tightly around his own, in a grip like iron the entire way down. Then, without warning, as they began to reach the lowest point of the arc, Izuku's arm, and the liquid encasing it, was hit by an explosion of pain. Izuku and Venom both screamed out in agony as the line keeping them up suddenly burst into countless black pieces of liquid. Thankfully, they slammed into the ground at a sideways angle, sending the duo rolling from the momentum, rather than just slamming into the ground. Which was good, because suddenly, all around them, the ground burst to pieces as invisible explosions hit all around, sending pieces of rock flying. Mina had also entered into a roll as they hit the ground, but unlike Izuku's, it was a much more controlled affair, and at the end, she jumped right back onto her feet in a flash of pink and black. Izuku forced himself to his feet, pushing himself up, as bangs of pain echoed through his body with every single explosion all around him. His hand didn't show any external signs of injury, other than the liquid that should have covered it having seemingly disintegrated, but to Izuku it felt like it had been literally run over by a car. Bloody hell, it hurt. "Are you okay, Midori?" Mina screamed over the sound of explosions all around. Then she yelped in pain as a piece of rocky shrapnel hit her in the head. She didn't fall over, thank God. But the red that suddenly dyed her pink hair was probably not a good thing. Damn this shit. Izuku's arm shot around, completely unprompted, as his entire body turned around, facing the rooftop they had just jumped off from. There. Izuku saw what he was aiming for. A figure in yellow on the rooftop. He instinctually moved his hand to aim, and on an internal command, a line of black goo shot from the white piece on his hand, much thicker than the web line he had used to anchor them to the roof. He couldn't hear it, but he both saw and felt his surprise as the man was hit by a black mass hitting him straight in the chest that sent him flying and burst out at the point of impact to engulf him in a huge black mass. For a second he just stood there, crouched, panting as the adrenaline still pumped through his body, the pain in his hand beginning to fade as the black liquid once more flowed forward to engulf it. Then reality hit him again as he remembered Mina was wounded, and he spun around. "You okay?" Yeah, Mina answered, though she winced as she said it, one hand over the spot where the blood came from. "It's just a cut." "Oh, thank God." Izuku thought immediately. If it had been a hole. He quickly got to his feet and walked over to her. "Venom, can you help her?" The black mass around his head detached itself once more and formed a head. "We can close the wound and stop the bleeding, Healing it is another story. We can only heal you." He bit his lip. "It'll have to do." He reached forward his hand to Mina's wound, and though she flinched at his touch, she did lower the blood-stained hand and allow his black hand to touch the wound. Suddenly, making both of them jump in startled surprise, a massive crash sounded as something slammed into the road not too far from them. Both their heads and attention snapped towards the origin of the sound. Rising up from a small crater was Rhino, still with a huge grin on his face. "So, you kids want to just skip introductions and instead jump straight into tangling with the American elite, eh? Okay, I'll oblige you." As IZUKU and Mina just stared for a second in shock, a piece of black liquid detached itself from IZUKU's hand and jumped over to Mina's head, closing around the wound and stopping the bleeding. Then, Rhino lifted his hands up and backwards in preparation of slamming them down forwards. IZUKU and Mina both realized what was about to happen, and both of them jumped sideways away from the center of the road. With a massive crash of sound, Rhino slammed his hands down into the road in a ground pound, looking more like Stan Lee's Hulk than anything else, a comparison only reinforced by his only piece of clothing. The road broke in half like it had just been cleaved with a giant knife, smaller rocks flying everywhere, and pipes filled with steam bursting up from the ground. IZUKU landed on a wall, clinging to it, whereas Mina landed on the sidewalk. Both the two teenagers gaped in shock and horror at the titanic display of strength. Huh. Yeah, that's not good. Not good at all.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.